Aboard the opulent Orient Express, trapped by a merciless snowstorm, a brutal murder shatters the night. Samuel Ratchet, a man with a sinister past, lies dead, stabbed 12 times in a locked compartment. Only Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, can unravel the web of secrets binding the passengers. From a vengeful princess to a guarded Englishwoman, everyone hides a truth. As the snow buries the train, Poirot uncovers a chilling conspiracy where justice and retribution collide. Will he expose the killer or let the truth stay buried? Chapter 1. The journey begins platform at Istanbul's Sirkeci station buzzed with the restless energy of departure. The late autumn sun hung low, casting long shadows across the cobblestones where porters darted between stacks of leather, trunks and valises, their voices mingling with the hiss of steam from the waiting train. The Orient Express, that legendary ribbon of steel and luxury, gleamed under the fading light. Its navy blue carriages polished to a mirror sheen. Brass fittings sparkled, and the gold lettering of the company Internationale der Wagenslits caught the eye of every traveller who paused to admire the train's elegance. It was October, a time when the world seemed to hold its breath before the plunge into winter, and the air carried a crisp edge tinged with the scent of coal and anticipation. Hercule Poirot stood a little apart from the crowd, his small, precise figure immaculate in a tailored overcoat of charcoal wool. His moustache, waxed to perfection, framed a face that was both sharp and serene, with eyes that missed nothing. He adjusted his gloves, his movements deliberate, and surveyed the scene with the quiet satisfaction of a man who appreciated order. The Orient Express was more than a train. It was a microcosm of society, a moving stage where human nature played out its dramas, and Poirot, ever the observer, felt a familiar stir of curiosity. He was returning to London after a case in Syria, a tiresome affair involving a stolen artifact, and a diplomat's indiscretions, and the prospect of a few days aboard the finest train in Europe was a welcome respite. Mon ami, he murmured to himself, what stories will this journey tell? A porter approached, bowing slightly, and gestured toward Poirot's luggage, a single, meticulously packed case. Monsieur Poirot, your compartment is ready in the Calais coach, first class, as requested. Merci. Poirot replied, his voice smooth and accented with the precision of his Belgian heritage. He tipped the porter with a discreet coin and followed him toward the train, his polished shoes clicking softly on the platform. The crowd was eclectic, a tapestry of wealth and ambition. A Russian princess, her furs trailing like a royal train, barked orders at a harried maid. An American businessman, his voice loud and brash, argued with a clerk over a misplaced ticket. A young Englishwoman, her face half hidden by a stylish hat, stood near the carriage door, her expression guarded but alert. Poirot's eyes lingered on her for a moment. She had the look of someone carrying a secret, but he filed the observation away, as he did with all first impressions, for later consideration. He stepped aboard, entering the narrow corridor of the Calais coach, where the air was warm and scented with polished wood and fresh linen. The Wagenlit's conductor, Pierre Michel, greeted him with a practiced smile. Michel was a Frenchman in his 40s, his uniform crisp, his demeanor polished but not obsequious. Monsieur Poirot, welcome aboard. Your compartment is number 2. Just here. Poirot nodded, inspecting the compartment with approval. It was compact yet luxurious, with a neatly made bed, a small wash basin, and a window offering a view of the bustling platform. The walls were panelled in rich mahogany, and a single light cast a soft glow over the space. He placed his case on the rack and sat, opening a small notebook to jot down a few thoughts. Routine, for Poirot, was not merely habit, it was a framework for clarity. As the train's whistle sounded, sharp and commanding, the Orient Express lurched forward, its wheels grinding against the tracks. Poirot glanced out the window, watching Istanbul slide away, the minarets of the Hagia Sophia fading into the dusk, the Bosphorus glinting like a silver thread. The journey to Calais would take 3 nights, crossing 7 countries, and Poirot allowed himself a moment to savor the rhythm of the train, the gentle sway that was both soothing and relentless. Dinner was announced at 7. And Poirot made his way to the dining car, a vision of Art Deco splendor. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across white tablecloths, and the clink of silverware mingled with the hum of conversation. The passengers, now settled, filled the car with a cosmopolitan air. Poirot was seated at a small table near the center, perfectly positioned to observe Dot. To his left sat Mrs. Caroline Hubbard, an American widow whose loud voice and incessant chatter carried across the car. She was in her late 50s, with a penchant for gaudy jewelry and an enthusiasm that bordered on exhausting. "Oh, this train is just divine," she exclaimed to her neighbor, a young Swedish governess named Greta Olsen, who nodded politely, but said little. Mrs. Hubbard's anecdotes about her travels in Europe were delivered with the confidence of someone who assumed everyone was listening. Across the aisle sat Princess Natalia Dragomirov, an elderly Russian aristocrat whose stern face and upright posture commanded respect. Her companion, a nervous German maid named Hildegard Schmidt, hovered attentively, arranging her shawl and refilling her water glass. The princess's eyes, sharp and unyielding, met Poirot's briefly, and he inclined his head in acknowledgment. She was a woman of power, he noted, but also of secrets. At another table, a young couple drew his attention, Mary de Benham, the Englishwoman from the platform, and Colonel John Arbuthnot, a British officer with a weathered face and a quiet demeanor. Their conversation was low, their glances cautious, as if they shared a bond they preferred to keep hidden. Poirot's curiosity deepened. There was something deliberate in their restraint. The final figure of note was Samuel Ratchet, the American businessman Poirot had seen arguing at the station. He sat alone, his heavy features and cold eyes giving him an air of menace. His secretary, Hector McQueen, a nervous young man with a habit of fidgeting, joined him briefly, whispering something that made Ratchet scowl. Poirot's instincts prickled. Ratchet was not a man who inspired affection. The meal was exquisite consomme, followed by roasted lamb with rosemary and a delicate chocolate souffle. But Poirot's attention was on the passengers, not the food. He listened to their voices, noted their gestures, and catalogued their interactions. The Orient Express was a stage, and every passenger was an actor, playing a role that might or might not be genuine. As dinner ended, Poirot returned to his compartment, pausing in the corridor to exchange pleasantries with Monsieur Boog, the train company director and an old friend. Boog was a jovial man, his round face flushed with the warmth of good wine. "Hercule, my friend, what do you make of our little company?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "A fascinating assortment." Poirot replied, his tone light but his mind already turning over possibilities. "There is always a story, mon ami, where so many paths converge." Boog chuckled. "You see mysteries everywhere, even on a train." "Especially on a train," Poirot corrected, his smile faint but knowing. The night deepened, and the train pressed on through the Turkish countryside, its rhythm steady and hypnotic. Poirot prepared for bed, his routine meticulous. He brushed his suit, polished his shoes, and placed his notebook on the bedside table. He was about to extinguish the light when a sound stopped him, a sharp cry, muffled but unmistakable, from the compartment next door. Ratchet's compartment. Poirot sat up, his senses alert. The cry was followed by a low murmur. A man's voice, perhaps Ratchet's, speaking in French. "Snestrine. Je suis trompé. It's nothing. I was mistaken." Then silence. Poirot frowned, his mind racing. The voice had carried an edge of fear, or perhaps anger. He waited, listening, but no further sounds came. After a moment, he jotted a note in his book. "Ratchet, midnight. Cry mistake or threat." Then he turned off the light and lay back, his eyes open in the darkness. The Orient Express sped on, its wheels singing against the rails, carrying its passengers deeper into the night and toward a mystery that would soon unravel. The snow was coming, though none yet knew how it would trap them all, nor how the shadows of retribution would fall across the stranded train. For now, Poirot slept, his mind a quiet machine, processing, cataloguing, waiting. Chapter 2. A cry in the night. The Orient Express rolled through the dark, its wheels clacking rhythmically against the tracks, a hypnotic pulse that lulled most of its passengers into a restless slumber. The train had departed Istanbul earlier, That evening, its opulent cars filled with a curious mix of travellers, aristocrats, merchants, and wanderers, all bound for distant corners of Europe. The air inside the Calais coach, where Hercule Poirot had settled into his first-class compartment, was heavy with the scent of polished wood, fresh linen, and the faint musk of expensive perfumes. The luxury of the train was undeniable, yet there was an undercurrent of unease, a tension that Poirot, with his keen instincts, could not ignore. He sat on the edge of his berth, his small, precise hands folded in his lap, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the late hour. The compartment was dimly lit, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the panelled walls. Outside, the Turkish countryside had given way to the rugged landscapes of Yugoslavia, the train carving its path through mountains and valleys cloaked in darkness. Poirot's mind, however, was not on the scenery. His thoughts were occupied by the passengers he had observed at dinner, a motley assembly of characters, each with their own secrets, their own stories. He had a habit of studying people, not out of idle curiosity, but because he believed that human nature was the key to unraveling any mystery. And this train, he sensed, was a crucible of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Poirot was preparing to retire when a sound pierced the quiet, a sharp, anguished cry, muffled but unmistakable, coming from somewhere down the corridor. His head snapped up, his grey eyes narrowing. The cry was brief, cut off as quickly as it had begun, but it carried a weight of distress that set his nerves on edge. He waited, listening intently, his body still as a statue. Moments later, he heard voices low, urgent, and speaking in a language he couldn't quite discern through the walls. The words were indistinct, but their tone suggested agitation, perhaps fear. Poirot rose, slipping on his silk dressing gown with the precision of a man who never acted without purpose. He opened the door to his compartment and stepped into the corridor, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet. The Calais coach was quiet now. The only sounds the distant hum of the train's engine and the occasional creak of the carriage as it swayed. The corridor was lined with closed doors, each hiding its occupant from view. Poirot's eyes scanned the row, lingering on the door to compartment number 2, where Samuel Ratchet, the wealthy American, was staying. The cry, he was certain, had come from that direction. He stood motionless, his ears straining for any further sound. The train lurched slightly, and he braced himself against the wall, his fingers brushing the cool brass of a handrail. Then, another noise of soft thud, like something heavy falling to the floor. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but to Poirot's trained senses, it was as loud as a gunshot. He took a step toward Ratchet's compartment, then paused. The door was closed, and no light spilled from beneath it. He considered knocking, but thought better of it. If something was amiss, he would need more than a hunch to justify intruding on a passenger's privacy. Instead, he moved to the end of the corridor, where a small window overlooked the passing landscape. The night was moonless, the world outside a void of black, save for the occasional flicker of a distant village light. The train was slowing now, its momentum faltering as if reluctant to press forward. Poirot's brow furrowed. He had travelled on the Orient Express before and knew its schedule well. There was no planned stop at this hour, not in this remote stretch of Yugoslavia. A moment later, the train shuddered to a halt, the brakes screeching as the carriage rocked gently. Poirot's suspicions deepened. He returned to his compartment, retrieved his overcoat, and made his way to the dining car where he expected to find Pierre Michel, the conductor assigned to the Calais coach. The dining car was empty, its tables cleared of the evening's service, the chandeliers casting a soft, golden light over the pristine white tablecloths. Michel was there, standing near the service door, his uniform immaculate, but his face betraying a hint of unease. "Monsieur Michel," Poirot said, his voice calm but firm, "what is the cause of this delay?" The conductor turned, startled by Poirot's sudden appearance. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, recovering quickly, "it is a snowdrift. I'm afraid. The tracks are blocked ahead. The engineer assures us it will be cleared by morning, but for now, we are stranded. A snowdrift, Poirot repeated, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "In this season. Most unusual." Michel nodded, though his expression suggested he was as puzzled as Poirot. "It is not common, monsieur, but it happens. The mountains here are unpredictable." Poirot inclined his head, accepting the explanation for now. "And the passengers? Are they aware?" "Most are asleep," Michel replied. "I have not thought it necessary to disturb them. We will inform everyone in the morning, once we know more." "Very well," Poirot said. "But tell me, Monsieur Michel, did you hear anything unusual just now? A cry, perhaps, or voices?" Michel's eyes widened slightly, but he shook his head. "A cry, monsieur? No, I heard nothing. The train is quiet, except for the usual noises." "Perhaps it was a dream, perhaps," Poirot said, though his tone suggested he was far from convinced. "But I am a light sleeper, and my ears do not deceive me. If you hear anything, you will inform me." "Oui, of course, monsieur," Michel said, bowing slightly. "I will keep watch." Poirot returned to his compartment, his mind racing. The cry, the voices. The sudden stop and the snow, it was all too coincidental, too neatly aligned to be mere chance. He sat at the small writing desk in his compartment, pulling out a notebook and pencil. With his usual meticulousness, he began to jot down observations. The time of the cry approximately 12:15 a.m. Its likely origin, Ratchet's compartment, and the subsequent sounds a thud, followed by silence. He also noted the train's unexpected halt and Michel's explanation, which, while plausible, did not entirely satisfy him. The Orient Express was a microcosm, a world unto itself, and Poirot knew that within its polished walls lay a puzzle waiting to be solved. He thought of Ratchet, the American with the hard eyes and the too smooth manners. At dinner, Poirot had observed him closely, noting the way he spoke with a calculated charm that did not reach his eyes. There was something about the man that set Poirot's instincts on edge, a sense of danger that lingered like a shadow. As he sat, his thoughts were interrupted by another sound, this time a faint knock at his door. He rose, his movements swift but silent, and opened the door to find Mrs. Hubbard, an American widow traveling alone. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with alarm. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I heard something awful. A cry, I think, from the next compartment. It woke me, and I couldn't help but come to you. You're a detective, aren't you?" Poirot's expression remained calm, but his mind was alert. "Madam, you are correct that I am a detective. Please, tell me exactly what you heard." "It was a cry," she said, clutching her shawl. "A man's voice, I think, but it was so quick, so sharp, and then, oh, I don't know, it sounded like someone was arguing, but the words were muffled. I thought I heard someone say no, or something like that. It was dreadful." "And which compartment?" "Madam," Poirot asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The one next to mine," she said. "Mr. Ratchet's, I believe." "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, do you think something's happened?" Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Madam, you must not distress yourself. I will investigate. Return to your compartment and lock the door. I will ensure all is well." Mrs. Hubbard nodded, though her eyes remained anxious. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I knew you'd know what to do," as she retreated down the corridor. Poirot closed his door and considered his next move. The cry, now corroborated by Mrs. Hubbard, was no figment of his imagination. Something had happened in Ratchet's compartment, and the snowdrift that had stranded the train only heightened his suspicion. That this was no ordinary night. He decided to wait until morning to approach Ratchet directly. If the man was unharmed, Poirot would need to tread carefully to avoid alarming him. If something more sinister had occurred, the light of day would reveal it. For now, he returned to his notebook, adding Mrs. Hubbard's account to his notes. He sketched a rough diagram of the Calais coach, marking the positions of the compartments, his own number 1, Ratchet's number 2, Mrs. Hubbard's number 3, and so on. He noted the proximity of each passenger to the scene of the cry, a detail that might prove significant. The night wore on, but sleep eluded Poirot, He lay on his berth, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, his mind turning over the events like a jeweler examining a gem for flaws. The Orient Express, with its locked compartments and isolated passengers, was a perfect stage for a crime, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, was determined to uncover whatever truth lay hidden in the snowbound night. The morning dawned grey and cold, the train still immobilized by the snowdrift. Poirot rose early, dressing with his usual care-black suit, crisp white shirt, and a tie knotted with precision. He stepped into the corridor, noting the stillness that hung over the carriage. The other passengers were beginning to stir, their voices muffled behind closed doors. Poirot made his way to Ratchet's compartment, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. He knocked on the door, a sharp rap that echoed in the quiet. There was no response. He knocked again, louder this time, but the silence persisted. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. He tried the handle, but the door was locked. As expected, he glanced down the corridor, spotting Pierre Michel approaching with a tray of coffee for the passengers. "Monsieur Michel," Poirot called softly. "A moment, if you please." The conductor hurried over, his face a mask of professional calm. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot." "I wish to speak with Monsieur Ratchet," Poirot said. "He does not answer." "Can you open the door?" Michel hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "It is not usual, monsieur, to enter a passenger's compartment without permission." "I understand," Poirot said, his voice firm but polite. "But I have reason to believe something may be amiss. You heard nothing last night." "You said, but I and another passenger heard a cry." "I insist you open the door." Michel nodded, producing a master key from his pocket. He inserted it into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The sight that greeted them stopped both men in their tracks. Samuel Ratchet lay on his berth, his body still, his face pale and lifeless. Blood stained the sheets, pooling around his chest where multiple stab wounds marred his nightshirt. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, and his mouth was frozen in a grimace of pain or surprise. The compartment was otherwise orderly. The curtains drawn, the small table beside the berth untouched except for a glass of water and a bottle of sleeping pills. Poirot stepped inside, his eyes scanning the scene with clinical precision. Michel, behind him, gasped and crossed himself. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. "He is dead." "Oui," Poirot said, his voice steady. "Murdered, I fear. We must summon Monsieur Boc and Dr. Constantine at once." Michel nodded, his face ashen, and hurried off to fetch the train company director and the Greek doctor who was among the passengers. As Poirot remained in the compartment, careful not to touch anything, he noted the position of the body, the number of wounds 12. By his quick count and the absence of any immediate signs of struggle, the door had been locked from the inside, and the window was closed, its latch secure. The puzzle was already forming in his mind, a complex web of clues and contradictions. Monsieur Boc, a stout Belgian with a penchant for dramatics, arrived moments later, followed by Dr. Constantine, a weary man with sharp eyes and a practical demeanor. Boc's face turned pale at the sight of Ratchet's body. "Mon Dieu, Poirot," he exclaimed. "What is this? Murder on the Orient Express? It is unthinkable." "Unthinkable, perhaps," Poirot said, "but undeniable. We must act quickly to preserve the scene and question the passengers. Dr. Constantine, can you confirm the time of death?" The doctor knelt beside the body, examining it with care. "He has been dead several hours," he said after a moment. "The body is cold, the blood congealed. I would estimate death occurred between midnight and 2 a.m., based on the rigor mortis." Poirot nodded, his mind already cataloguing the timeline. The cry he had heard at 12:15, followed by the voices and the thud aligned with the doctor's estimate, and the wounds he asked. 12 stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. Constantine said, "Some shallow, some deep. The weapon was likely a knife, though it is not here. The variation in the wounds is curious somewhere. Delivered with force, others more hesitantly." "Curious indeed," Poirot murmured. He turned to Boc. "We must secure this compartment and ensure no one enters until we have examined it thoroughly." Monsieur Michel, you will guard the door. Michel nodded, still shaken. Yes, monsieur. Poirot's eyes swept the compartment, again, taking in every detail. The neatly folded clothes on a chair, the untouched luggage, the absence of any signs of a struggle. He bent down, peering under the berth, and noticed a small object glinting in the corner, a pipe cleaner, twisted and discarded. He retrieved it carefully, holding it up to the light. Interesting, he said softly. What is it? Poirot, Book asked, leaning forward. A clue, perhaps, Poirot said, or a distraction. We shall see, as the three men stepped back. Into the corridor, Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of the mystery. A cry in the night, a locked compartment, a murdered man, and a train stranded in the snow. The Orient Express had become a stage for a crime of extraordinary complexity, and Hercule Poirot was determined to unravel its secrets one clue at a time. The investigation began in earnest that morning with Poirot, Book, and Dr. Constantine, forming an impromptu team. The passengers were informed of the murder in a carefully worded announcement, designed to prevent panic while encouraging cooperation. The dining car became their base of operations, its tables cleared to serve as a makeshift interrogation room. Poirot sat at the head of one table, his notebook open, his pencil poised. As he prepared to question the passengers, the first to be interviewed was Mrs. Hubbard, who had come to him in the night. She entered the dining car, her hands fluttering. Nervously, her eyes darting around the room. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot," she said, sinking into a chair. "I can't believe it. Murdered, right next door to me. I'll never sleep again." "Madam, you must compose yourself," Poirot said gently. "Tell me everything you heard last night. Every detail, no matter how small." Mrs. Hubbard recounted her story, her voice trembling as she described the cry, the muffled voices, and her fear that something terrible had happened. She added a new detail. She was certain she had heard a man's voice say no, followed by a woman's voice, though she couldn't make out the words. Poirot listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. "And you saw nothing?" he asked. "No one in the corridor?" "No, monsieur," she said. "I was too frightened to open my door until I came to you." Poirot nodded, making a note. "Thank you, madam. You have been most helpful." Next came Pierre Michel, the conductor, who repeated his claim that he had heard nothing unusual. Poirot pressed him, noting the slight hesitation in his answers. But Michel remained adamant. "I was in my compartment, monsieur, at the end of the coach. I heard only the train and the wind." Poirot dismissed him for the moment, turning his attention to the other passengers. One by one, they came to the dining car, each offering their own account of the night. Mary de Benham, a young Englishwoman with a composed demeanour, claimed to have slept through the night, hearing nothing. Princess Dragomirov, an elderly Russian noblewoman with a commanding presence, said she had taken a sleeping draught and was undisturbed. Hector McQueen, Ratchet's secretary, admitted to hearing a noise but dismissed it as the train's usual creaks. Each passenger's story was plausible, yet Poirot sensed a thread of deception running through them all. Their alibis were too neat, their denials too quick. He made careful notes, sketching a web of connections between the passengers, the cry, and the murder. The pipe cleaner, the locked door, the cry at 12:15, all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together as the day wore on. Poirot returned to Ratchet's compartment to conduct a more thorough search. With Book and Constantine at his side, he examined every inch of the space. He found a burned scrap of paper in the ashtray, its edges charred but a few words still legible. Daisy Armstrong. The name sent a jolt through him. He knew of the case, a child kidnapped and murdered years ago in America, a tragedy that had shocked the world. Could Ratchet be connected to it? He also found a handkerchief monogrammed with the letter H, tucked beneath the pillow. It was delicate, feminine, and out of place in the man's compartment. A smashed watch, its face frozen at 1:15, lay on the floor near the berth, as if dropped in haste. Each clue was a thread, leading him deeper into the mystery. By evening, the snow still held the train captive, and Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who had cried out in the night? Why was the door locked from the inside? And what did the clues, the pipe cleaner, the handkerchief, the burned note mean? He sat in the dining car, staring at his notes, his little grey cells working tirelessly. "Monsieur Book," he said at last, "this is no ordinary murder. There is a pattern here, a design. The cry, the clues, the passengers, they are all part of a larger picture. But what that picture is, I do not yet know." Book shook his head, his face grim. "Poirot, you frighten me. A murder on my train, and now you speak of patterns and designs. What kind of killer are we dealing with?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, mon ami, is what I intend to find out." As the night closed in around the snowbound train, Poirot felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. The Orient Express was a world unto itself, its passengers bound together by secrets and lies. And somewhere among them was a murder, or perhaps more than one. The cry in the night had been the first note in a deadly symphony, and Hercule Poirot was determined to conduct it to its conclusion. Chapter 3. The body in the compartment of Orient Express. Halted in its tracks by the unyielding snowdrift, stood silent under the cold Yugoslavian sky. The opulent train, a marvel of engineering and luxury, seemed almost humbled by the relentless grip of nature. Its polished wood panels and gleaming brass fittings, which had glowed warmly under the chandeliers the previous evening, now reflected only the pale, diffused light filtering through the frosted windows. The passengers, roused from their sleep by the abrupt stop, milled about in various states of disarray, their murmurs of confusion and irritation filling the corridors. Hercule Poirot, however, was already awake, his sharp mind alert despite the early hour. The cry he had overheard in the night lingered in his thoughts, a discordant note in the otherwise rhythmic hum of the train's journey. Poirot adjusted his silk dressing gown, his small, precise movements betraying none of the unease he felt. He had slept poorly, his dreams disturbed by the faint but unmistakable sound of distress that had pierced the stillness of the night. It had come from the direction of Samuel Ratchet's compartment, the American passenger whose brash demeanor and guarded glances had piqued Poirot's curiosity from the moment they boarded in Istanbul. The detective's instincts, honed by years of unraveling human deceit, told him that something was amiss. He stepped into the corridor, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet, and made his way toward the dining car where he suspected the morning's events would soon unfold. The dining car was a scene of controlled chaos. Passengers, wrapped in furs and heavy coats against the chill that seeped through the train's walls, sipped coffee and exchanged theories about the delay. Monsieur Book, the director of the company Internationale des Wagenslits, stood at the far end of the car, his round face flushed with agitation as he conferred with a harried-looking conductor. Poirot caught his eye, and Book waved him over with a gesture that was equal parts relief and desperation. "Monsieur." "Poirot, Book," said, his voice low but urgent, "we have a situation, a most dreadful situation." His Belgian accent, usually polished, was roughened by anxiety. "It is Ratchet. He is dead." Poirot's expression remained impassive, though his grey eyes sharpened. "Dead, you say? How?" "Murdered," Book replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Stabbed in his compartment. The door was locked from the inside." Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, the only outward sign of his intrigue. "Locked, you say? Most interesting. Take me to him at once." Book led Poirot through the narrow corridor of the Calais coach, where the first-class compartments were located. The air grew heavier as they approached Ratchet's compartment, number 2, the second from the end. A small crowd had gathered, passengers craning their necks, their curiosity barely masking their unease. The conductor, Pierre Michel, stood guard at the door, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled with his keys. "Stand aside, please," Book said, his authority cutting through the murmurs. The passengers parted reluctantly, their eyes following Poirot as he stepped forward. The detective noted their faces: Mrs. Hubbard, the talkative American widow; Colonel Arbuthnot, the stiff-backed Englishman; Mary de Benham, the composed young governess. Each wore an expression of shock, but Poirot's trained eye caught the subtler currents beneath, a flicker of fear, A hint of calculation inside the compartment. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood. Samuel Ratchet lay sprawled across his berth, his silk pajamas stained crimson. His face, frozen in a grimace of surprise, stared blankly at the ceiling. The bedclothes were tangled, as though he had thrashed in his final moments. Poirot's gaze swept the scene, cataloguing every detail, the 12 stab wounds, some shallow, others deep, scattered across his chest and abdomen. The window, closed and latched, the door still locked when Michel had forced it open. The small table beside the berth, holding a glass of water, a bottle of sleeping draught, and a single cigarette stub. Dr. Constantine, a Greek physician travelling, in the next coach, joined them, his medical bag in hand. He knelt beside the body, his fingers probing the wounds with clinical precision. "He has been dead for some hours," he said, his accent thick but clear. "The wounds are varied. Some are mere scratches, others penetrated deeply." The killer was either frenzied or uncertain. Or perhaps, Poirot mused, deliberate in their inconsistency. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he examined the body. The wounds were not random, he thought. There was a pattern, a rhythm, though it eluded him for the moment. He straightened, turning to Book. "The door. You say it was locked?" "Yes," Book confirmed. Michel had to use his master key to enter. The bolt was thrown from the inside. "And the window?" Poirot asked, moving to inspect it. The latch was secure, and the glass was frosted over with ice. No one could have entered or exited that way, not without leaving traces in the snow. Outside, Michel, the conductor, spoke up, his voice unsteady. "I heard nothing after the cry last night, monsieur. I was in my compartment at the end of the coach. The passengers were all in their beds, as far as I know." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "And who discovered the body?" "I did," Michel said. "Mrs. Hubbard in the next compartment. Complained of a noise in the night. She rang for me this morning, insisting something was wrong. When I knocked on Monsieur Ratchet's door, there was no answer. I used my key and found him like this." Poirot's eyes flicked to the door separating Ratchet's compartment from Mrs. Hubbard's. A communicating door, he noted, but it was bolted on Ratchet's side. No entry there. He turned back to the body, his mind racing. A locked compartment, a murdered man, and a train stranded in snow. The puzzle was intricate, and Poirot relished the challenge. "Let us begin with the facts," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Dr. Constantine, please confirm the time of death as precisely as you can. Monsieur Boog, ensure no one enters or leaves this compartment. Michel, remain here. I will need your account in full later." As Constantine continued his examination, Poirot began a meticulous search of the compartment. He moved with the precision of a watchmaker, his small hands deft and deliberate. On the table, beside the cigarette stub, he found a matchbook, its cover embossed with the Orient Express logo. The stub itself was curious, not a common brand, but one with a faint, distinctive scent. He slipped it into a handkerchief for later analysis. Under the pillow, partially concealed, was a small, crumpled piece of paper, its edges charred as though it had been held to a flame. Poirot unfolded it carefully, revealing fragments of text. Strong, Daisy. The rest was illegible, burned away. He held it to the light, his lips pursing. A clue, perhaps, he murmured, or a misdirection. Next, he examined the floor. A pipe cleaner, bent into a slight curve, lay near the berth. It was an unusual item for a man like Ratchet, who had shown no signs of smoking a pipe. Poirot tucked it away, his mind already forming connections. Near the door, caught in the seam of the carpet, was a single white thread, fine and delicate. He plucked it up, holding it to the light. It could belong to anyone or no one, but it was a detail, and Poirot never dismissed details. The most perplexing find was a woman's handkerchief, dropped near the corner of the berth. It was fine linen, embroidered with a single initial, H. Poirot turned it over in his hands, his expression unreadable. "H," he said softly. "Hubbard, or another. We shall see." Finally, he turned to the watch on Ratchet's wrist. It was a heavy, expensive piece, its crystal face smashed, the hands frozen at 1:15. Poirot frowned. Was it broken during a struggle, or deliberately stopped to mislead? The time coincided roughly with the cry he had heard, but something about. It felt staged, theatrical. Bouc watched him anxiously. What do you make of it, Poirot? A robbery gone wrong? A personal vendetta? Poirot shook his head. Non, my friend. This is no simple crime. The locked door, the varied wounds, the clues left so conveniently. This is a performance carefully staged. But for whom and why? Constantine looked up from the body. I estimate death between midnight and 2 a.m., based on rigor and body temperature. The cold in the compartment may have slowed the process slightly. Poirot nodded. Then we have a window. The cry I heard was shortly after midnight. The watch says 1:15. We must determine what happened in that hour. He stepped back, taking in the scene as a whole. The compartment was small, barely 10 feet by 6, yet it held a multitude of secrets. The locked door suggested an inside job, but the snow outside was undisturbed, ruling out an external intruder. The passengers, then, were the key each had. Been in this coach, each had access to Ratchet's compartment, or so it seemed. But how had the killer entered and exited a locked room? And why leave such an array of clues? Poirot's mind worked like a loom, weaving threads of fact into patterns of possibility. The burned note hinted at a past crime, something significant enough to warrant murder. The handkerchief and pipe cleaner suggested carelessness or cunning. The watch, stopped at 1:15, could be a precise marker of time or a deliberate red herring. And the wounds, 12 of them, no less felt symbolic, almost ritualistic. He turned to Book. We must interview the passengers at once. Everyone in this coach, and anyone who might have seen or heard something. No one is above suspicion. Book nodded, though his expression was grim. This will not be easy. Poirot, these are wealthy, influential people. They will not take kindly to accusations. Then they must endure my questions, Poirot said, his tone firm. A man is dead, and the truth does not care for rank or wealth. As they left the compartment, Poirot glanced back at Ratchet's body, now covered with a sheet. The man had been unpleasant, secretive, his eyes always darting as though expecting danger. Perhaps he had known it was coming. Perhaps he had invited it. The corridor outside was quieter now, the passengers having retreated to their compartments or the dining car. Poirot's gaze lingered on the door to Mrs. Hubbard's compartment, number 3, directly adjacent to Ratchet's. She had complained of a noise had summoned Michelle. Was it genuine fear, or something else? He made a mental note to speak with her first. In the dining car, Poirot set up a makeshift interrogation room, using a corner table screened by a velvet curtain. Book and Constantine joined him, the former to translate and manage the passengers, the latter to offer medical insights. Michelle stood by, ready to provide his account of the night. Mrs. Hubbard was the first to be called. She bustled in, her face a mixture of indignation and nervousness, her hands clutching a lace shawl. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, this is simply dreadful," she exclaimed, her American accent sharp. "A murder right next door to me. I heard something last night, I swear it a thud, and then voices. I couldn't sleep a wink after that." "Tell me precisely what you heard, madam," Poirot said, his pen poised over a small notebook. "It was after midnight," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was reading, you see, because I couldn't sleep. This train, it's so noisy. Anyway, I heard a cry, like someone in pain, and then a thud, like something heavy falling, and voices low but angry. I couldn't make out the words. And you rang for the conductor?" Poirot asked, double quotes, "Yes, but not until this morning. I was too frightened to leave my compartment last night. I thought it might be a robbery, or worse." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Did you see anyone in the corridor? A woman, perhaps, in a scarlet kimono?" Mrs. Hubbard blinked, startled. "A scarlet kimono? No, I saw no such thing." "Why? Who would wear something so garish at that hour?" Poirot made a note, his expression neutral. "Thank you, madam. That will be all for now." As she left, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. She heard the cry as I did, but the voices interesting and no mention of the kimono. Either she is truthful or she is a fine actress. Next was Colonel Arbuthnot, his military bearing evident even in his civilian clothes. He sat stiffly, his answers clipped and precise. I was in my compartment, number 15, all night. He said, heard nothing, saw nothing. Retired at 10, slept soundly until the train stopped. And you knew Monsieur Ratchet? Poirot asked. Met him briefly in the dining car, Arbuthnot said. Seemed a coarse sort. Not my type of fellow. Poirot noted the Colonel's guarded tone, the way his eyes avoided direct contact, and the cry in the night. You heard nothing, nothing. Arbuthnot said firmly, I sleep like a soldier deeply, but ready to wake at a moment's notice. Poirot dismissed him, his mind turning to Mary de Benham, the young Englishwoman whose calm demeanour had struck him as unusual. She entered gracefully, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. I was asleep when the train stopped. She said, I heard no cry, no voices. My compartment, number 11, is at the far end of the coach. And your connection to Monsieur Ratchet? Poirot asked. None, she said, her voice steady. I saw him in the dining car, but we did not speak. Poirot watched her closely, noting the slight tightening of her jaw. She was composed, perhaps too composed, and the scarlet kimono. He asked. Her eyes flickered, but only for a moment. I saw no one in the corridor, monsieur. I was asleep. As she left, Poirot tapped his pen against his notebook. Each tells a story, he said to book, but none tells the whole truth. The cry, the voices, the locked door, these are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. The interviews continued, each passenger offering a fragment of the night's events. Princess Dragomirov, the elderly Russian noblewoman, claimed to have slept through the night, her maid attending her every need. Antonio Foscarelli, the boisterous Italian, swore he had been playing cards with another passenger until late. Hector McQueen, Ratchet's young secretary, admitted to being awake but claimed he had heard nothing unusual. By midday, Poirot's notebook was filled with contradictions. No one admitted to seeing the woman in the scarlet kimono, yet the handkerchief with the H suggested a female presence. The burned note hinted at a motive tied to a past crime, but no one claimed knowledge of Ratchet's history. The watch stopped at 1:15, aligned with the cry, but the locked door remained an enigma. Poirot stepped outside the dining car, needing a moment to clear his mind. The snow stretched endlessly around the train, a white prison that mirrored the confines of the mystery. He lit a cigarette, not his usual brand, but one from the matchbook he had found. The scent was faint, familiar, but he could not place it. Not yet. Back in the dining car, he conferred with Bouc and Constantine. The clues are too many, he said. A handkerchief, a pipe cleaner, a burned note, a smashed watch. They are like breadcrumbs leading us somewhere or nowhere. We must look deeper. Constantine frowned. The wounds trouble me. 12 stabs, but not all equal. It is as though multiple hands held the knife. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisely. Doctor, multiple hands or the appearance of them. This is not a crime of passion, but of calculation. We must find the connection between Ratchet and these passengers. Bouc sighed. But how, Poirot? They are strangers thrown together by chance. Chance, Poirot said, a faint smile touching his lips. Non mon ami. There is no chance in murder, only purpose. As the day wore on, Poirot returned to the compartment, examining each clue again. The burned note nagged at him. Daisy, it had said. A name, perhaps, or a code. He would need to dig into Ratchet's past, but for now the passengers were his focus. Each had a story, a secret, and Poirot was determined to uncover them all. The snow continued to fall outside, sealing the Orient Express in its icy grip. Inside, the air grew heavier, the passengers' glances more guarded. Poirot felt the weight of their secrets, pressing against the walls of the train like the snow itself. The truth was there, hidden in the details, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until he found it. Chapter 4. Clues in the snow. The Orient Express stood motionless, its sleek metal body entombed in a drift of snow that stretched endlessly across the Yugoslavian wilderness. The world outside was a silent expanse of white, the kind of stillness that seemed to hush even the thoughts of those trapped within the train's luxurious confines. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but serene. The discovery of Samuel Ratchet's body, stabbed 12 times in his locked compartment, had cast a pall over the passengers and crew. Hercule Poirot, his sharp mind already whirring, stood at the threshold of the crime scene, his eyes scanning the small, opulent space where death had made its brutal mark. The compartment was a study in contrasts, the elegance of the Orient Expresses. Polished wood paneling and plush furnishings clashed violently with the grim reality of the corpse. Sprawled across the bed, Ratchet's face, frozen in a grimace of shock, stared blankly at the ceiling. The blood had soaked into the fine linens, staining them a dark, rusty red. Poirot's gaze moved methodically, taking in every detail the position of the body, the angle of the wounds, the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the air. He was joined by Monsieur Buck, the train company director, whose round face was pale with unease, and Dr. Constantine, a weary Greek physician whose medical expertise would prove invaluable. Mon Dieu, Buck muttered, his voice trembling as he hovered near the doorway, unwilling to step fully into the room. This is a catastrophe, Poirot. A murder on the Orient Express. What will this do to the reputation of the company Internationale des Wagenslits, Poirot's mustache twitched, but he offered no reply to Buck's lament. His focus was elsewhere, on the puzzle before him. Dr. Constantine, he said, his voice calm but commanding, if you would be so kind as to examine the body, we must establish the time of death and the nature of the wounds. Constantine nodded, stepping forward with a professional detachment that belied the gravity of the situation. He knelt beside the bed, his fingers probing the wounds with care. 12 stab wounds, he confirmed after a moment, his accent thick but precise. Some shallow, others deep. The force varies as does the angle. It is unusual. Unusual how? Poirot asked, his green eyes narrowing as he leaned closer. Constantine hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The wounds suggest multiple assailants, or, at the very least, a single assailant with inconsistent strength and technique. The deepest wounds are precise, almost surgical, while others are wild as if driven by rage. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. And the time of death, based on the body's temperature and rigor. I would estimate between midnight and 2 in the morning, Constantine replied. The stopwatch may provide a clue, but I cannot be certain until we examine it further. Poirot's attention shifted to the small table beside the bed where a smashed pocket watch lay, its face frozen at 1:15. He picked it up gingerly, turning it over in his gloved hands. The glass was shattered, the hands bent, but the time was unmistakable. 1:15, he murmured. A curious detail. Was it broken in a struggle, or was it staged to mislead us? He set the watch down and continued his inspection. The compartment was small, but every inch of it held potential clues. A burned scrap of paper caught his eye, tucked partially beneath the ashtray. Using a pair of tweezers from his pocket, Poirot carefully extracted it. The edges were charred, but a few words remained legible. Strong. Daisy. Never. The rest was lost to the flames. Poirot's lips pursed as he placed the fragment into a small envelope. This, he said softly, may be the key to our mystery. Next, he noticed a pipe cleaner, twisted and discarded near the foot of the bed. It was an odd item out of place in the otherwise pristine compartment. Poirot held it up to the light, examining its fibers. A smoker, perhaps, he mused, or another planted clue. His eyes then fell on a delicate handkerchief, crumpled in the corner of the room. It was fine linen embroidered with a single initial, H. Poirot's fingers traced the letter, his mind racing through the passenger list. H, he repeated. Mrs. Hubbard, or someone else entirely? Buck, growing increasingly agitated, interrupted. Poirot, this is madness. A locked compartment, a dead man, and now these cryptic clues. How are we to make sense of it? Poirot turned to his friend, his expression serene but resolute. "By employing the little grey cells, my dear book, every clue, no matter how small, is a piece of the puzzle. We must simply arrange them correctly." He moved to the door, testing the lock. It was a sturdy mechanism designed to ensure privacy. For the train's elite passengers, the bolt was still engaged from the inside, and there was no sign of tampering. The window, too, was locked, and the snow outside showed no footprints or disturbances. The door was locked from within, Poirot said, almost to himself, yet someone entered, killed Monsieur Ratchet, and left without leaving a trace. Or so it appears. Constantine, who had finished his examination of the body, joined Poirot at the door. "There is another possibility," he said cautiously. "The murderer may still be in this carriage. One of the passengers, perhaps." Book gasped. "One of our passengers? Impossible. These are people of refinement, of status." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Status, Monsieur Book, does not preclude motive, nor does it guarantee innocence. We must consider every possibility." The trio stepped out into the corridor, where the conductor, Pierre Michel, stood waiting, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. His face was drawn, his eyes darting nervously. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, bowing slightly, "I have ensured no one has entered or left the compartment since the body was discovered." "Merci, Michel," Poirot replied. "Tell me, did you hear anything unusual last night? A cry, perhaps? Or footsteps?" Michel hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the buttons of his jacket. "There was a cry, monsieur. Round midnight, perhaps a little after. It came from Monsieur Ratchet's compartment. I knocked, but he called out that it was nothing, a nightmare. I thought no more of it." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And after that?" "Nothing, monsieur. The train was quiet until we stopped in the snowdrift." Poirot nodded. Dismissing Michel for the moment, he turned to Book and Constantine. "We have a burned note, a pipe cleaner, a handkerchief, a smashed watch, and a locked door. These are our clues in the snow, messieurs. Now, we must dig deeper." The investigation continued as Poirot methodically searched the rest of the carriage. He examined the neighboring compartments, noting their occupants, Mrs. Hubbard, the talkative American, widow, Princess Dragomirov, the imperious Russian aristocrat, Mary de Benham, the reserved English governess, and a host of others, each with their own peculiarities. Nothing immediately stood out, but Poirot's instincts told him that the answers lay not just in the physical evidence but in the passengers themselves. He returned to Ratchet's compartment, his mind turning over the clues. The burned note gnawed at him. The word Daisy suggested a connection to the infamous Daisy Armstrong case of kidnapping. That it ended in tragedy, with the child's death and a cascade of grief that destroyed her family. Could Ratchet be linked to that crime? The thought sent a shiver through Poirot, not from the cold but from the dawning realization that this murder might be more than a random act of violence. He knelt beside the bed once more, examining the wounds. 12 stabs, some precise, others erratic. It was as if the killer or killers had been driven by a mix of calculation and passion. The number 12 struck him as significant. 12 wounds. 12 passengers in the carriage. A coincidence? Poirot did not believe in coincidences. As the morning wore on, the snow outside showed no sign of relenting, and the train remained stranded. Poirot gathered Book and Constantine in the dining car, where the other passengers were beginning to stir, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Whispers of the murder had spread, and the air was thick with suspicion. "We must proceed with care," Poirot said, his voice low. "The passengers will be nervous, and a nervous suspect is a dangerous one. I will begin interviews this afternoon, but first, I must study these clues further. The note, the handkerchief, the pipe cleaner, they are not random. They are messages left for us to decipher." Book wrung his hands. "But Poirot, what if the murderer strikes again? We are trapped here, like rats in a cage." Poirot's smile was faint but reassuring. "Fear not, my friend. The murderer has done their work for now. This was a deliberate act, planned with precision. Our task is to unravel that plan before the snow clears and our killer slips away." The rest of the day was spent in meticulous analysis. Poirot sat at a small table in the dining car, his notebook open before him. He sketched the layout of the carriage, marking the position of Ratchet's compartment and the clues within it. The burned note was a particular obsession. He tried to reconstruct the missing words, but the fragments offered little clarity. Daisy was the key, he was certain. But how did it connect to the other clues? The handkerchief with the H troubled him as well. Mrs. Hubbard was the obvious suspect, but her brash demeanor and constant complaints about the train service seemed at odds with the subtlety of the crime. Could the handkerchief belong to someone else, Hildegard Schmidt, the German maid, perhaps, or was it a deliberate misdirection? The pipe cleaner was equally perplexing. Few passengers admitted to smoking a pipe, and the item seemed out of place in the compartment of a man, like Ratchet, who favored cigars. Poirot made a mental note to question the male passengers more closely about their habits. As for the smashed watch, the time 1:15 was tantalizingly specific, if it was accurate. It placed the murder shortly after the cry Michelle had heard, but if it was staged, it could be part of an elaborate alibi. Poirot's fingers tapped the table as he considered the possibilities. A killer who left such clues was either careless or cunning, and he leaned toward the latter. By late afternoon, Poirot had formed a preliminary theory, though he kept it to himself. The locked door suggested an inside job, but the lack of footprints in the snow outside the window ruled out an external intruder. The passengers, then, were the most likely suspects, but their alibis were frustratingly vague. Each claimed to have been asleep or in their compartment at the time of the murder, and without witnesses, it was difficult to disprove their stories' daughters. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. Poirot prepared for the next phase of his investigation. The clues in the snow had given him a starting point, but the real answers lay in the hearts and minds of the passengers. He would begin his interviews, probing their stories, watching their faces for tells, and piecing together the web of lies and truths that surrounded Ratchet's death. The dining car was now filled with the clatter of cutlery and the murmur of voices as the passengers gathered for dinner. Poirot observed them from his corner, his eyes flicking from one face to another. Mrs. Hubbard, gesticulating wildly as she recounted some anecdote. Princess Drogomirov, her sharp eyes missing. Nothing. Mary de Benham, her composure almost perfect. And Pierre Michel, the conductor, hovering at the edges, his nervousness palpable. Poirot sipped his coffee, the warmth of the cup grounding him in the midst of the chaos. The clues were there, hidden in the snow, in the compartment, in the passengers. Words. He would find them, one by one, until the truth was laid bare. For Hercule Poirot, there was no mystery too complex, no puzzle too intricate. The snow might have stopped the Orient Express, but it would not stop him. The chapter unfolded as Poirot delved deeper into the physical evidence, his mind weaving connections between the clues and the passengers. The burned note, with its tantalizing reference to Daisy, hinted at a motive rooted in the past, a tragedy that had left scars on more than one soul aboard the train. The handkerchief, with its embroidered H, suggested a personal connection, perhaps a woman's touch in a crime that felt increasingly orchestrated. The pipe cleaner, an oddity in a world of cigars and cigarettes, pointed to a specific individual or a deliberate attempt to mislead. And the smashed watch, frozen at 1:15, was either a genuine marker of the time of death or a clever ruse to obscure it. Poirot's investigation was methodical, but it was also deeply human. He understood that clues were not just objects but reflections of the people who left them. The passengers, with their secrets and their stories, were as much a part of the puzzle as the physical evidence. As he prepared to question them, he knew that the truth would not come easily. Lies would be told, alibis would be crafted, and motives would be buried beneath layers of deception. The snow outside continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. But within the Orient Express, the storm was just beginning. Poirot, with his little grey cells and his unyielding determination, was ready to face it. Chapter 5. The passengers. Secretary Hercule Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, his sharp eyes scanning the opulent dining car of the Orient Express. The chandeliers above cast a soft, golden glow reflecting off the polished wood paneling, and the gleaming silver cutlery. Despite the elegance, a palpable tension hung in the air, as if the luxurious surroundings were merely a veneer over a cauldron of secrets. The train, still stranded in the Yugoslavian snowdrift, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next revelation in the brutal murder of Samuel Ratchet. Poirot, with his meticulous mind, was determined to uncover the truth, and today he would begin questioning the passengers in earnest. Monsieur Bouc, the director of the company Internationale des Wagonslets, sat across from Poirot, his round face creased with worry. Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had examined Ratchet's body, joined them, his notebook open, ready to record any pertinent details. The dining car, usually a hub of lively conversation, was subdued, the passengers' eyes darting nervously as Poirot prepared to summon them one by one. Mon ami, Poirot said to Bouc, his voice calm but firm, we must proceed with precision. Each passenger is a piece of this puzzle, and I suspect many are hiding truths. We shall start with Mrs. Hubbard, the American lady who claims to have heard a commotion last night. Bouc nodded, his fingers tapping anxiously on the table. She's a talkative one, Poirot. I hope you can sift through her chatter to find something useful. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign of amusement. Chatter, Monsieur Bouc, is often the veil behind which truth hides. Let us see what Mrs. Hubbard reveals. Mrs. Linda Arden Hubbardmas. Linda Arden Hubbard bustled into the dining car, her loud floral dress clashing with the muted elegance of the surroundings. She was a middle-aged American widow, her face lined with the kind of indignation that suggested she was perpetually offended by the world's inconveniences. She clutched a small handbag, her fingers fidgeting as she sat down opposite Poirot. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, this is simply dreadful," she exclaimed before he could even speak. "A murder on this train. Why, I hardly slept a wink last night after hearing that awful cry, and to think I was right next door to that poor Mr. Ratchet." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture polite but commanding silence. "Madam, let us begin with the facts. You say you heard a cry. At what time was this, and what exactly did you hear?" Mrs. Hubbard's eyes widened as if thrilled to recount her tale. "Well, it was after midnight. I'm sure of it. I was lying in my berth, trying to read, when I heard this terrible cry, sort of a groan, like someone was in pain. And then voices, low and muffled, coming from Mr. Ratchet's compartment. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like an argument. I was so frightened, I ran for the conductor immediately." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And did the conductor, Pierre Michel, respond promptly?" "Oh, yes, he came right away," Mrs. Hubbard said, nodding vigorously. "He knocked on Mr. Ratchet's door, but there was no answer. He told me it was probably nothing, that Mr. Ratchet might have had a nightmare, but I knew something was wrong, Monsieur Poirot. A woman's intuition, you know." Poirot made a mental note of her emphasis on intuition. "Did you hear anything else, madam? Footsteps, perhaps, or the sound of a door opening or closing?" Mrs. Hubbard hesitated, her fingers tightening around her handbag. "Well, now that you mention it, I did hear footsteps in the corridor later, maybe around 1 o'clock. Light, quick steps, like someone trying not to be heard. I thought it might be that young Englishwoman, Mr. Benham, but I couldn't be sure." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but probing. "And why? Madam, did you think of Mr. Benham specifically?" Mrs. Hubbard flushed, her hands fluttering. "Oh, no reason, really. Just that she's so reserved, you know? Always watching, always quiet. It makes one wonder what she's hiding." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "See, madam, that will be all for now. Please send in Miss Mary de Benham." As Mrs. Hubbard left, Poirot turned to Dr. Constantine. "What do you make of her, doctor?" Constantine shrugged, his dark eyes thoughtful. "She talks much, but says little. The footsteps she mentioned, perhaps they are significant, perhaps not. But her nervousness suggests she knows more than she lets on." Poirot smiled faintly. "Indeed, Let us see what Mr. Benham reveals. Miss Mary Debenham de Benham entered the dining car with a composed grace that contrasted sharply with Mrs. Hubbard's nervous energy. She was a young Englishwoman in her late 20s, with clear grey eyes and a demeanour that suggested both intelligence and restraint. Her simple navy dress and neatly pinned hair gave her an air of quiet authority. But Poirot noticed the slight tension in her posture as she sat down. Mademoiselle de Benham, Poirot began, his tone courteous. You are a governess, I understand, travelling from Baghdad. Can you tell me about your movements last night? Mary's eyes met his, steady but guarded. I retired to my compartment around 10 o'clock. I shared it with Miss Olson, the Swedish missionary. We talked for a while, then went to bed. I slept soundly until the train stopped in the snowdrift, which woke me briefly. After that, I heard nothing unusual. Poirot tilted his head, studying her. Nothing unusual. Not even the cry that Mrs. Hubbard claims to have heard. Mary's lips pressed together briefly before she answered. No, Monsieur Poirot. I heard no cry. The train was quiet, except for the creaking of the snow and the wind outside. And did you leave your compartment at any point during the night? Poirot asked. His voice deceptively mild. Mary hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but Poirot caught it. No, she said firmly. I stayed in my berth all night. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Mademoiselle, you are a woman of intelligence. I sense you are choosing your words with care. Is there anything you wish to tell me about Mr. Ratchett or the other passengers? Mary's expression remained calm, but her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. I barely knew Mr. Ratchett, she said. We spoke briefly in the dining car yesterday, but it was nothing significant. As for the other passengers, they are strangers to me. Poirot nodded, though his eyes gleamed with interest. Very well. Mademoiselle, you may go. Please send in Princess Dragomirov. As Mary left, Book leaned forward, his voice low. She's hiding something, Poirot. Did you see that pause? She knows more than she's saying. Poirot's moustache twitched. Oui, Monsieur Book. But what she hides and why is the question. Let us see what the princess reveals. Princess Natalia Dragomirov, Princess Natalia Dragomirov entered the dining car with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to command. Her age was difficult to discern, somewhere between 60 and 70, but her sharp eyes and commanding presence made her seem timeless. Her black dress, adorned with a single strand of pearls, spoke of understated wealth. She sat down with a slight nod to Poirot, as if granting him an audience. Madame la Princess. Poirot said, bowing slightly, I am honored to speak with you. Can you tell me about your movements last night? The princess's lips curved. In a faint, almost amused smile. Monsieur Poirot, I am an old woman. I retire early and sleep lightly. Last night, I was in my compartment by 9 o'clock. My maid, Hildegard Schmidt, attended to me before retiring herself. I heard nothing unusual, though I was aware of the train stopping in the snow. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Nothing at all, madam. No cry, no footsteps, no voices. The princess met his gaze unflinchingly. Nothing, monsieur. My compartment is at the far end of the carriage, and my hearing, while sharp, is not what it once was. Poirot nodded, shifting his approach. You are a woman of great experience, madam. Did you know Mr. Ratchett, or perhaps observe anything about him during this journey? The princess's expression hardened slightly, though her voice remained calm. I knew of him, Monsieur Poirot, as one knows of a certain type of man. He was coarse, loud, and unpleasant. I avoided him. Poirot leaned forward, his tone gentle, but probing. And yet, madam, I sense you know more about this man than you say. Perhaps a connection from the past. The princess's eyes flickered, but her composure held. You are perceptive, Monsieur Poirot, but I assure you my knowledge of Mr. Ratchett is superficial. He was a man who made enemies, and I am not surprised he met such an end. Poirot smiled faintly, recognizing the deflection. Merci, madam. That will be all for now. Please send in Mr. McQueen. As the princess rose, her movements slow but deliberate. Book whispered to Poirot, "She's like a fortress, that. 1. You'll get nothing out of her unless she chooses to give it." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Patience. Mon ami. Even fortresses have cracks." Hector McQueen, Ratchet's young American secretary, entered the dining car with unnervous energy that contrasted with the princess's calm. He was in his early 30s, with a boyish face and a habit of running his hand through his sandy hair. He sat down, his eyes darting between Poirot, Book, and Constantine. "Mr. McQueen," Poirot began, "you were close to Mr. Ratchet as his secretary. Tell me about your movements last night." McQueen swallowed his Adams. "Apple bobbing. I was in my compartment, reading some papers Mr. Ratchet gave me. He was particular about his correspondence, you see. I went to bed around 11, and I didn't hear anything unusual until the train stopped. That woke me up, but I went back to sleep." Poirot's gaze was steady. "And what can you tell me about Mr. Ratchet, his habits?" "His enemies?" McQueen hesitated, his fingers tapping on the table. "He was a private man, sir. He didn't talk much about his past, but I knew he'd made a lot of money in business. He was always careful, almost paranoid. He mentioned once that he thought someone was after him, but he didn't give details." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Someone was after him? Did he name this person?" "No," McQueen said quickly. "He just said he'd made enemies in his line of work. I didn't press him. It wasn't my place." Poirot leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "And last night, Mr. McQueen, did you see or hear anything unusual? A cry, perhaps, or footsteps?" McQueen shook his head. "No, sir. Like I said, I was asleep. The train stopping was the only thing that disturbed me." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "See, Mr. McQueen, you may go. Please send in Colonel Arbuthnot." As McQueen left, Dr. Constantine leaned forward. "He's nervous, Poirot. Did you notice how he avoided your eyes when talking about Ratchet's enemies?" "Oui," Poirot said softly. "He knows something, but fear holds him back. Let us see what the Colonel reveals." Colonel John Arbuthnot strode into the dining car with the bearing of a military man, his posture erect and his expression stern. He was a tall, lean Englishman in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed mustache and a no-nonsense demeanor. He sat down, his eyes meeting Poirot's with a mixture of respect and wariness. "Colonel Arbuthnot," Poirot said, "you are a man of discipline, I see. Can you tell me about your movements last night?" Arbuthnot's voice was clipped and precise. "I was in the smoking car until about 10:30, then retired to my compartment. I shared it with Mr. McQueen, as you know. I read for a bit, then went to sleep. The train stopping woke me briefly, but I heard nothing else." Poirot tilted his head. "And Mr. Ratchet? Did you know him?" Arbuthnot's jaw tightened. "I met him briefly in the dining car. He was loud, abrasive. Not my sort of man. I kept my distance." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, Colonel, you were seen speaking with Mr. Benham yesterday, quite intently. Is there a connection between you?" Arbuthnot's face reddened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Mr. Benham and I are acquaintances. We met in Baghdad and found we had much in common. That's all." Poirot smiled faintly. "Merci, Colonel. That will be all for now. Please send in Miss Olsen." As Arbuthnot left, Book shook his head. "Another one hiding something, Poirot. This train is full of secrets." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Indeed, mon ami. And each secret is a thread in the tapestry of this crime." Greta Olsen, the Swedish missionary, entered the dining car with a timid air. She was a plain woman in her 30s, with pale blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun and a nervous smile. Her hands twisted together as she sat down, her eyes darting to Poirot. "Mademoiselle Olsen," Poirot said gently, "you shared a compartment with Mr. Benham. Can you tell me about last night?" Greta's voice was soft, with a slight Scandinavian accent. "I was in my compartment with Mr. Benham. We talked about my work in the missions, then went to bed. I slept until the train stopped. I heard nothing unusual." Poirot leaned forward, his tone soothing. "And Mr. Ratchet, did you know him?" Greta's eyes widened and she shook her head quickly. "No, monsieur. I saw him in the dining car, but we did not speak. He seemed not a kind man." Poirot nodded, his eyes studying her. "And during the night, mademoiselle, did you leave your compartment at all?" Greta's hands stilled and she looked down. "No, monsieur. I stayed in my berth." Poirot smiled kindly. "Merci, mademoiselle. You may go. Please send in Mr. Hardman." As Greta left, Constantine murmured, "She's frightened, Poirot." But of what? Poirot's eyes narrowed. "That, doctor, is what we must discover." Cyrus Hardman, a burly American with a loud voice and a penchant for chewing gum, swaggered into the dining car. He was a private detective, he claimed, and his brash demeanor suggested he was used to getting his way. He sat down, leaning back in his chair with a confident grin. "Mr. Hardman," Poirot said, "you are a detective. I understand. This must be an intriguing case for you. Can you tell me about your movements last night?" Hardman shrugged, popping his gum. "I was in my compartment, catching some shut-eye. The train stopping woke me up, but I didn't hear nothing else. No cries, no footsteps." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "And Mr. Ratchet, did you know him?" Hardman's grin faded slightly. "Yeah, I knew of him. He was a big shot, had enemies. I was keeping an eye on him, you know, professional interest." Poirot leaned forward. "And did you see anything suspicious, Mr. Hardman, in your professional observations?" Hardman hesitated, then shook his head. "Nah, nothing concrete. Just a feeling he was in trouble." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, Mr. Hardman. That will be all for now." As Hardman left, Book sighed. "They're all lying, aren't they, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Not lying, mon ami. Omitting. Each tells a piece of the truth, but none the whole. We must continue. The remaining passengers over the next few hours." Poirot interviewed the remaining passengers. Antonio Foscarelli, an Italian car salesman with a quick smile and evasive answers. Masterman, Ratchet's English valet, who claimed to have been ill and asleep, Hildegard Schmidt. The princess's maid, who seemed terrified and said little, and the Andrenys, a Hungarian couple who insisted they had stayed in their compartment all night. Each interview added to the web of half-truths, each passenger revealing just enough to satisfy Poirot's questions, while holding back something vital. As the day wore on, Poirot's mind churned with the details. The passengers' stories were too neat, too rehearsed. The crime Mrs. Hubbard heard, the footsteps, the scarlet kimono, each piece of evidence seemed to point in multiple directions. And yet, there was a pattern, a thread connecting them all. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments. A moment of reflection. That evening, as the snow continued to trap the train, Poirot sat alone in his compartment, his notebook open before him. He had written down each passenger's testimony, noting their hesitations, their glances, their carefully chosen words. There was a connection here. He was certain a link between the passengers and Ratchet, something deeper than mere chance. He thought of Mrs. Hubbard's nervous chatter, Mary Debenham's guarded composure, the princess's regal deflection. Each had something to hide. But what? And why did their stories align so perfectly, as if rehearsed? Poirot's mind turned to the burned note found in Ratchet's compartment, the one hinting at his true identity as Cassetti, the man responsible for the Daisy Armstrong tragedy. Could it be that these passengers, so diverse in background, were united by a shared past, a shared pain? Poirot closed his notebook, his eyes narrowing. "The truth," he murmured to himself, "is not in what they say, but in what they do not say. Tomorrow I shall dig deeper." He extinguished the light and lay back in his berth. The train creaking around him, the Orient Express, snowbound and silent, held its secrets tightly. But Hercule Poirot was not a man to be deterred. The passengers' secrets would be revealed, one by one, until the truth of Ratchet's murder lay bare. Chapter 6. Ratchet's dark past Orient Express lay entombed in snow, its luxurious compartments now a stage for suspicion and secrets. Hercule Poirot sat in the dining car, his small, precise hands folded neatly before him, his eyes sharp. As they scanned the faces of the passengers around him, the air was thick with unease, the clink of coffee cups and the murmur of strained conversation, unable to mask the undercurrent of dread that had settled since the discovery of Samuel Ratchet's body. 12 stab wounds, a locked compartment, and a train stranded in the Yugoslavian wilderness. Poirot's mind churned with the puzzle, each piece a tantalizing fragment of the truth. Monsieur Boug, the affable director of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagons Lids, sat across from Poirot, his face a map of worry. Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had examined Ratchet's body, joined them, his brow furrowed as he sipped his coffee. The dining car, with its polished wood and gleaming silver, felt less like a haven of elegance and more like a gilded cage. Mon ami, Poirot began, addressing Book, we are faced with a crime most perplexing. The clues we have found, the burned note, the pipe cleaner, the handkerchief, the stopwatch, they are like stars in a constellation, visible yet not yet connected. But there is one clue that demands our attention, the note. It was burned, yes, but not entirely destroyed. And what it reveals may illuminate the motive for this murder. Book leaned forward, his mustache twitching with curiosity. The note, you saw something in it, Poirot? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained serious. Indeed, the fragment was small, but enough to suggest a name tied to a tragedy that shocked the world. Daisy Armstrong. Dr. Constantine's cup paused halfway to his lips. Armstrong? You mean the kidnapping case? The child who was taken and killed? Precisement, Poirot said, his voice low but firm. The note, though charred, bore the letters Strong. It is no coincidence, I think, that this name appears in the compartment of a man now dead, stabbed with such ferocity. We must uncover who Samuel Ratchet truly was, for I suspect he was not the man he claimed to be. The dining car seemed to grow quieter, as if the very mention of the Armstrong case had cast a shadow over the passengers. Poirot's mind drifted to the details of that infamous tragedy, a case that had gripped newspapers across continents. Daisy Armstrong, the 3-year-old daughter of a wealthy American family, had been kidnapped from her home. Her parents, Colonel and Mrs. Armstrong, had paid a ransom of $200,000, only to learn that their daughter was already dead, her body discovered in a shallow grave. The grief had destroyed the family. Mrs. Armstrong, pregnant at the time, miscarried and died. Colonel Armstrong, heartbroken, took his own life. The maid, suspected of complicity, had leapt from a window in despair before her innocence was proven, and the man responsible for it all, a criminal named Cassetti, had fled justice, his wealth and cunning shielding him from prosecution. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he recalled the burned note. The letters Strong could only point to one thing, the Armstrong case. And if Ratchet was connected to it, perhaps even was Cassetti then the motive for his murder. Took on a new, chilling clarity. Revenge, Poirot thought, was a powerful force, capable of driving men and women to extraordinary acts. He rose from his seat, his movements deliberate. Messieurs, we must return to the scene of the crime. There are questions yet unanswered, and I suspect the compartment holds more secrets than we have uncovered. Book and Constantine followed, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of the corridor as they made their way to Ratchet's compartment. The door was still sealed, guarded by a porter who stepped aside at Book's nod. Inside, the air was heavy, the faint metallic tang of blood lingering despite the cold. Ratchet's body had been covered with a sheet, but the scene remained vivid in Poirot's mind, the 12 stab wounds, some shallow, some deep, delivered with a mixture of precision and rage. Poirot knelt beside the small table where the burned note had been found. The ashes had been carefully collected, and he examined them again, his fingers deftly sifting through the fragments. The note was burned to conceal its contents, he murmured, but the act was hasty. The writer's name, or part of it, remains Strong. And then there is this. He held up a tiny scrap, barely legible, with the word remember, scrawled in a hurried hand. Remember, Book echoed, his voice tinged with unease. Remember what? Perhaps, Poirot said, it is a message to Ratchet himself, a warning. Or perhaps it is a reminder to the one who wrote it, a reminder of a wrong. That could not be forgotten. Dr. Constantine rubbed his chin, his medical mind grappling with the implications. If Ratchet was Cassetti, the man who destroyed the Armstrong family, then this murder was no random act. Someone on this train knew who he was. Oui, Poirot agreed, and that someone, or perhaps several someones, had reason to hate him. The 12 stab wounds are significant, I think. 12 is not a random number. It suggests deliberation, a symbolic act. But we must proceed carefully. The passengers must be questioned again, and we must probe their connections to the Armstrong case. The trio left the compartment, the door clicking shut behind them. Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. The passengers on the Orient Express were a diverse group, hailing from different countries, classes and backgrounds. Could one of them or more be linked to the Armstrong tragedy, the maid who died? The family's friends, their employees, any could have a motive, and yet the locked compartment and the snowbound train complicated matters. The killer or killers were still aboard, their secrets hidden behind polite smiles and rehearsed alibis. Poirot returned to the dining car where the passengers had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Mrs. Hubbard, the talkative American widow, was fanning herself dramatically, her voice carrying over the others. I tell you, it's not safe on this train, a murderer among us, and we're stuck in this snow like sitting ducks. Princess Dragomirov, her sharp eyes glinting beneath her fur hat, raised a hand to silence the chatter. Madam, your hysterics do no one any good. Monsieur Poirot will find the truth, will you not? Poirot inclined his head, his moustache twitching slightly. I shall do my utmost, Princess, but I require the cooperation of all present. Each of you may hold a piece of the puzzle, whether you know it or not. He began with Mrs. Hubbard, whose garrulous nature made her an easy starting point. She recounted her night, insisting she had heard strange noises and seen a man in her compartment, a claim Poirot noted with skepticism, given her tendency to exaggerate. Yet her mention of a button found on her floor, one that did not match any of her garments, piqued his interest. It was just lying there, Monsieur Poirot, she said, producing a small, ornate button from her handbag. I thought it might belong to that dreadful man, Ratchet. Poirot examined the button, its intricate design suggesting wealth and taste. Curio, he murmured. This does not seem to belong to Monsieur Ratchet's wardrobe. We shall keep it in mind. Next, he turned to Princess Dragomirov, whose regal bearing belied a steely resolve. She admitted to knowing of the Armstrong case, as did most of high society, but claimed no personal connection. A tragedy, she said, her voice cold. But such things happen in America, do they not? The law failed that poor child. Her words were measured, but Poirot detected a flicker of emotion in her eyes. Was it grief, anger? He pressed further, asking about her travels and her companions, but the princess remained elusive, her answers polite but vague. Mary de Benham, the young English governess, was next. Her composure was remarkable, her answers concise, but Poirot noted a tension in her posture, as if she were guarding a secret. When asked about the Armstrong case, she hesitated, then said, I read about it in the papers, like everyone else. It was horrible. Her words were measured, but Poirot detected a flicker of emotion in her eyes. Was it grief, anger? He pressed further, asking about her travels and her companions. But the princess remained elusive, her answers polite but vague. Mary de Benham, the young English governess, was next. Her composure was remarkable, her answers concise. But Poirot noted a tension in her posture, as if she were guarding a secret. When asked about the Armstrong case, she hesitated, then said, I read about it in the papers, like everyone else. It was horrible, indeed, Poirot said, his eyes never leaving her face. And yet, mademoiselle, you seem troubled. Is there something you wish to share? Her lips parted, then closed. No, monsieur, nothing. The interviews continued. each passenger offering a piece of their story. Colonel Arbuthnot, the stern British officer, claimed to have smoked a pipe in the corridor around midnight, a detail that aligned with the pipe cleaner found in Ratchet's compartment. Hector McQueen, Ratchet's nervous secretary, admitted to handling his employer's correspondence but denied knowledge of the burned note. Pierre Michel, the conductor, swore he had seen no one enter or leave Ratchet's compartment. Though his eyes darted nervously as he spoke. As the day wore on, Poirot's suspicions grew. The passengers' stories were too neat, their alibis too convenient, and yet the clues: the burned note, the pipe cleaner, the handkerchief. The button pointed to something larger, a web of connections that stretched back to the Armstrong case. Poirot's mind returned to the 12 stab wounds, 12 jurors, perhaps 12 avengers. Each striking a blow for justice, he retired to his compartment to think, his notebook filled with sketches and questions. The burned note was the key. He was certain. If Ratchet was Cassetti, then the motive was clear: retribution for the Armstrong family. But who among the passengers had the means, the opportunity, and the will to carry out such a plan? And how had they entered and exited a locked compartment on a snowbound train? Poirot closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of his thoughts mimic the clatter of the train's wheels before they had stopped. That is, the Armstrong case was a wound that had never healed, its ripples touching countless lives. The maid who died, the family's friends, their loyal staff, any of them could be on this train, disguised by time and circumstance, and the number 12 haunted him. 12 wounds. 12 passengers in the Calais coach. Was it coincidence, or was it design? He opened his eyes. His resolve hardened. The truth lies in the past, he murmured to himself, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall uncover it. The snow outside continued to fall, sealing the train in its icy prison, but within, the heat of secrets and lies was building, and Poirot knew that the next revelations would bring him closer to the heart of the mystery, or deeper into its shadows. Chapter 7. Alibis and leased Orient Express remained trapped in the snow, its opulent interiors now a stage for suspicion and secrecy. Hercule Poirot sat in the dining car, his notebook open, his small, precise handwriting filling the pages with observations. The murder of Samuel Ratchet, revealed to be the notorious Cassetti, had transformed the train into a labyrinth of motives and half-truths. Each passenger was a puzzle piece, and Poirot was determined to fit them together, no matter how cleverly they tried to obscure the truth. Monsieur Book, the train company director, sat across from him, his face etched with worry. "Poirot, this is a nightmare. A murderer among us, and we're stuck in this snow. What do you make of these passengers? Surely not all of them can be involved." Poirot's mustache twitched as he tapped his pencil against the notebook. "Mon ami, in a case such as this, we must assume nothing. Each passenger has a story, and each story has cracks. It is through these cracks that the truth will emerge." Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had examined Ratchet's body, joined them, rubbing his hands to ward off the chill. "The wounds are curious, Poirot. 12 stabs. Some shallow, some deep. It's as if the killer couldn't decide whether to kill or merely wound." Poirot nodded. "A fascinating observation, Doctor. It suggests either hesitation or deliberation. Perhaps both. Now, let us proceed with the interviews. We must unravel these alibis and lies." The dining car had been transformed into an impromptu interrogation room. The velvet curtains were drawn, casting a soft glow from the overhead lamps. The passengers, summoned one by one, entered with varying degrees of unease. Poirot's sharp eyes missed nothing: the flicker of a glance, the tightening of a jaw, the subtle shift of a hand. First came Pierre Michel, the conductor of the Calais coach, where Ratchet's compartment was located. He was a weary man in his 40s, his uniform crisp despite the chaos. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he sat down. "Monsieur Michel," Poirot began, his voice calm but probing, "you were on duty last night. Tell me everything you saw and heard." Michel swallowed hard. "I was in the corridor, monsieur, most of the night. I heard nothing unusual until the cry, around 1 in the morning. It came from Monsieur Ratchet's compartment. I knocked, but he called out that it was nothing a nightmare. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you believed him? Michel hesitated. It is not my place to question passengers, monsieur. He sounded convincing. I returned to my post, and after that, Poirot pressed, nothing until Madame Hubbard rang her bell, frantic, saying someone was in her compartment. I checked, but there was no one. Then, this morning, we found Monsieur Ratchet dead. Poirot leaned forward. You saw no one else in the corridor? No one at all? Michel's eyes darted to the side. No one, monsieur, except, well, I thought I saw a woman in a scarlet kimono, but it was just a glimpse. I couldn't be sure. Poirot made a note. A scarlet kimono. Interesting. And your movements, Monsieur Michel? Where were you at precisely 1:15? Michel's face flushed. I was at my station at the end of the coach. I swear it. Poirot dismissed him with a nod, but his mind was already turning. Michel's story was plausible, but the hesitation in his voice suggested more. Was he hiding something, or was he simply nervous under scrutiny? Next came Mrs. Hubbard, the American widow whose loud voice and dramatic gestures filled the dining car. She clutched a handkerchief, dabbing at her eyes, though no tears were visible. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, it's just awful, she exclaimed. A murderer on this train. I knew something was wrong when I heard that cry last night. And then, someone was in my compartment. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Tell me about this intruder, madam. Mrs. Hubbard's eyes widened. It was after midnight. I was in bed and I heard a noise, a creak, like someone moving. I rang for the conductor at once. I'm sure it was the murderer, trying to silence me. And you saw this person? Poirot asked. Well, no, not exactly, she admitted, but I felt their presence. And that cry from Mr. Ratchet's compartment, it was blood-curdling. Poirot noted her flair for drama. And where were you at 1:15, madam? Mrs. Hubbard blinked. Why? In my compartment. Of course, I didn't dare leave after that fright. Poirot thanked her and moved on, but her story gnawed at him. Her insistence on an intruder seemed exaggerated, almost rehearsed. Was she deflecting suspicion? Or was she genuinely terrified? The interviews continued, each passenger adding a layer to the mystery. Princess Drogomirov, the elderly Russian aristocrat, entered with a regal air, her sharp eyes belying her frail appearance. She leaned on a cane, her fur stole draped over her shoulders. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low and commanding, I understand you must do your duty, but I assure you, I have no connection to this sordid affair. Poirot smiled, politely. And yet, madam, you were awake last night, were you not? Did you hear or see anything unusual? The princess's lips tightened. I heard a cry, yes, but I am an old woman, and I do not involve myself in the affairs of others. I remained in my compartment, and at 1:15, Poirot asked. I was reading, she said firmly. I do not sleep well on trains. Poirot made a note. Her composure was impeccable, but her connection to the Armstrong family revealed in earlier interviews as a friend of Daisy's. Grandmother made her a figure of interest. Was her aloofness a mask for deeper involvement? Mary de Benham, the young English governess, was next. Her cool demeanor and steady gaze suggested intelligence and control, but Poirot sensed an undercurrent of tension. Miss de Benham, he began. You were seen speaking with Colonel Arbuthnot before the train departed Istanbul. You seemed agitated. May I ask why? Mary's eyes flickered, but she answered calmly. We were discussing trivial matters, Monsieur Poirot. The journey, the weather, nothing more. And last night, Poirot pressed. Where were you at 1:15? In my compartment, asleep, she said. I heard nothing until the train stopped. Poirot leaned back, studying her. Her answers were too precise, too polished. He recalled her earlier conversation with Arbuthnot, overheard in Istanbul. Not now, when it's all over. What had she meant? Colonel Arbuthnot, the stern British officer, followed. His military bearing was evident in his rigid posture and clipped responses. I was in my compartment, smoking a pipe, he said when asked. About 1:15. I heard the cry, but I assumed it was a passenger having a nightmare. I didn't investigate. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A pipe, you say? Interesting. A pipe cleaner was found in Ratchet's compartment. Arbuthnot's jaw tightened. Plenty of men smoke pipes, Poirot? It proves nothing. Perhaps. Poirot said, making a note. The pipe cleaner was a small clue, but its presence in the crime scene suggested a connection. Was Arbuthnot careless? Or was someone framing him? The interviews continued through the afternoon, each passenger offering a carefully crafted alibi. Hector McQueen, Ratchet's secretary, claimed he was in his compartment. Reviewing papers, Antonio Foscarelli, the Italian car salesman, said he was asleep, though his loud snoring was unconfirmed. Greta Olsen, the Swedish missionary, tearfully insisted she was praying in her compartment. Each story was plausible on its own, but together they formed a tapestry of inconsistencies. Poirot closed his notebook and leaned back, his mind racing. The alibis were too neat, too uniform. No one admitted to leaving their compartment, yet the cry, the scarlet kimono, and the locked door suggested movement in the night. The burned note, linking Ratchet to the Armstrong case, hinted at a motive shared by multiple passengers. But how could 12 people, from such diverse backgrounds, coordinate a murder? Monsieur Book, Poirot said, we are dealing with a conspiracy, or we are being led to believe we are. The clues, the handkerchief, the pipe cleaner, the kimono, are they genuine, or are they distractions? Book shook his head. But who would plant such clues, and why? Poirot's eyes twinkled. To confuse us, mon ami. To make us doubt the obvious. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily misled. Dr. Constantine frowned. What about the time of death? The watch stopped at 1:15, but the wounds suggest he died shortly after the cry. Could the watch be a plant? Poirot nodded. A possibility. The watch, the kimono. The handkerchief, they are theatrical, are they not? As if the murderer wishes to tell a story. The dining car grew quiet as Poirot stood, pacing slowly. Let us consider the conductor, Pierre Michel. He claims he was at his station, yet he saw the scarlet kimono. Mrs. Hubbard insists on an intruder, yet no one was found. Mr. Benham and Colonel Arbuthnot are connected, yet they deny it. And the Princess' connection to the Armstrongs cannot be ignored. Book rubbed his temples. It's too much, Poirot. How can they all be involved? Poirot stopped pacing, his eyes bright. That, Monsieur Book, is the question. If they are all involved, we are dealing with a crime of extraordinary complexity. If they are not, then one among them is a master of deception. The interviews resumed, but Poirot shifted his approach. Instead of asking for alibis, he probed for connections. He asked McQueen about Ratchet's enemies, and the secretary admitted his employer had received threatening letters. He questioned Foscarelli about his travels in America, and the Italian grew evasive when the Armstrong case was mentioned. Greta Olsen broke down in tears when asked about children, hinting at a personal loss tied to the Armstrong tragedy. As the day wore on, the snow outside showed no sign of relenting. The train remained a prison, and Poirot's mind was a crucible, refining each clue into a sharper truth. The handkerchief with the initial H could belong to Mrs. Hubbard, but her denial was vehement. The pipe cleaner pointed to Arbuthnot, but he dismissed it with scorn. The scarlet kimono remained a phantom, its owner elusive. By evening, Poirot had interviewed every passenger and the conductor. He sat with Book and Constantine, his notebook now a map of contradictions. We have 12 alibis, he said, and yet none of them are ironclad. The cry at 1 o'clock, the stopped watch at 1:15, the kimono, the locked door, they form a puzzle. But the pieces do not yet fit. Constantine leaned forward. Could it be an outsider? Someone who boarded the train and escaped into the snow? Poirot shook his head. The snow is untouched, Doctor. No footprints, no signs of entry. The murderer is among us. Book groaned. Then what now, Poirot? We cannot accuse them all. Poirot smiled faintly. We do not accuse, mon ami. We observe. We listen. The lies will unravel themselves. For no lie can stand for ever against the truth. As night fell, Poirot returned to his compartment, his mind still working. The passengers' alibis were, like threads in a tapestry, each one carefully woven to conceal a greater design. He thought of the Armstrong case, of the pain it had caused, and of the passengers' connections to it. Was it possible that they had acted together, each playing a part in Ratchet's death, or was one among them manipulating the others, using their grief to mask a personal vendetta? He opened his notebook and reviewed his notes, his pen circling key details. Pierre Michel hesitant. Saw kimono. Mrs. Hubbard intruder story, overly dramatic. Princess Drogomira Farm strong connection to composed. Mary de Benham secretive. Linked to Arbuthnot. Colonel Arbuthnot pipe cleaner, defensive. McQueen knew of threats. Foscarelli evasive about America. Olson emotional about children. The clues were mounting, but the truth remained just out of reach. Poirot closed his eyes, letting his mind drift through the facts. The cry-in, the night, the locked door, the 12 wounds. They were not random. They were a message, a statement. But what did they say? He thought of the scarlet kimono, a vivid image in an otherwise muted scene. It was too conspicuous, too deliberate. Was it a distraction, meant to draw attention from the real clues, or was it a symbol, a clue to the murderer's identity? Poirot's thoughts turned to the passengers' motives. The Armstrong case had left a trail of devastation, parents, friends, and loved ones destroyed by Cassetti's crime. If the passengers were connected to that tragedy, their alibis could be a collective shield, protecting not one murderer but many. The idea was audacious, almost unthinkable. Yet Poirot's little grey cells hummed with the possibility. He stood, pacing his small compartment. The train was silent now, the passengers retired to their compartments, but the air was thick with tension. Poirot knew he was close, but the final piece of the puzzle eluded him. He needed to test his theories, to push the passengers until their lies crumbled. Tomorrow, he decided, he would change tactics. He would confront them not as individuals, but as a group, watching their reactions, looking for the telltale signs of guilt. The truth was there, hidden in their alibis and lies, and Hercule Poirot would find it. As he prepared for bed, the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the train in silence. But inside, the storm of suspicion raged on, and Poirot knew that the morning would bring new revelations. Chapter 8. The woman in the scarlet kimono. The Orient Express lay still, entombed in the Yugoslavian snow, its opulent corridors cloaked in an eerie quiet that seemed to amplify every creak and whisper. Hercule Poirot sat in his compartment, his small, precise hands folded over a notebook, his eyes sharp and unyielding despite the late hour. The murder of Samuel Ratchet or Cassetti, as Poirot now knew him to be, had cast a shadow over the train, and the air was thick with suspicion. The passengers, a kaleidoscope of wealth, status, and secrets, moved through the narrow corridors like players in a carefully choreographed drama. Each step measured, each glance weighted with unspoken meaning. Yet, among the clues and contradictions, one detail gnawed at Poirot's meticulous mind: the fleeting glimpse of a woman in a scarlet kimono, seen in the corridor near Ratchet's compartment. A figure no one claimed to know. The night was deep, the snow outside relentless, piling higher against the train's windows, sealing the passengers in their iron-bound world. Poirot's compartment, though modest, was a sanctuary of order. His bed was neatly made, his toiletries arranged with military precision, and a single lamp cast a warm glow over the small table where his notebook lay open. He had written the names of the passengers in a tidy column, each accompanied by a brief description of their demeanor, their alibis, and the inconsistencies that prickled his intuition. Beside the name of Mrs. Hubbard, he had underlined the word kimono twice. The ink bold and deliberate dot. Mrs. Hubbard, the loquacious American widow, had been the first to mention the scarlet kimono during her interview earlier that day. Her voice had trembled with indignation as she recounted her sleepless night. "I heard something, Monsieur Poirot," she had said, her hands clutching her shawl as if it could ward off the memory, a rustling like silk. "And then I saw her through the crack of my door. You understand, a woman in a scarlet kimono." slipping past in the corridor. It was after midnight, I'm sure of it. I thought it queer, but with all that's happened, I didn't dare open my door." Poirot had listened, his head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed her words. Mrs. Hubbard was a woman of theatrical gestures, prone to exaggeration, but her description of the kimono had a specificity that intrigued him. Scarlet, she had said, with intricate embroidery, gold perhaps, or silver catching the dim light of the corridor. Yet when Poirot had pressed her further, she had faltered, unable to recall the exact pattern or whether the woman had worn her hair up or down. It was dark, she had protested, and I was frightened. What with that cry I heard earlier? The cry, another piece of the puzzle. It had come from Ratchet's compartment, or so Poirot believed. Sometime after midnight, before the train had ground to a halt in the snowdrift. The cry had been sharp, masculine, followed by muffled voices, one calm, almost soothing. Speaking in French, "Snest ring, Jimmy sweet trompy, it's nothing. I was mistaken." Poirot's ear for language was impeccable, and he had noted the phrase's oddity. Who, in the midst of a cry, would respond so calmly and in French, no less? The conductor, Pierre Michel, had confirmed hearing voices as well, though he claimed they were too faint to discern. Yet the scarlet kimono remained the most tantalizing clue, a splash of color in an otherwise monochrome mystery. Poirot rose from his seat, his movements deliberate, and adjusted the knot of his tie in the small mirror above the wash basin. His reflection stared back, the mustache immaculate, the eyes bright with the fire of deduction. He would not sleep tonight, not yet. The kimono was a thread, and he intended to pull it until the tapestry of lies unraveled. He slipped his notebook into his pocket, donned his overcoat, and stepped into the corridor. The train was a labyrinth of shadows, the gas lamps casting flickering patterns on the polished wood paneling. The air was heavy with the scent of wax, and the faint, lingering perfume of the passengers' rosewater, lavender, and something sharper, like cloves. Poirot moved silently, his polished shoes making no sound on the carpet. He paused outside Mrs. Hubbard's compartment, number 16, adjacent to Ratchet's number 2. The door was closed, but a faint light seeped from beneath it, suggesting she was still awake. He considered knocking, but decided against it. Mrs. Hubbard had already given her account, and he suspected her histrionics masked a sharper mind than she let on. Instead, he moved to the Calais coach's dining area, where Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine were waiting. The two men sat at a small table, a bottle of brandy between them, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Bouc, the Belgian director of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagonslets, looked particularly strained, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by a furrowed brow. Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician, was more composed, though his fingers drummed restlessly on the table. "Monsieur Poirot," Bouc said, rising as Poirot approached, "you look as fresh as if it were morning. Have you solved this wretched business yet?" Poirot smiled faintly, seating himself with a small flourish. "Not yet, mon ami, but the little grey cells. They are working. The scarlet kimono troubles me." "The kimono?" Constantine frowned, his dark eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Hubbard's story. I thought it a trivial detail. Perhaps a hallucination brought on by nerves." "Non," Poirot said sharply, his finger raised. Hercule Poirot does not dismiss details as trivial. A woman in a scarlet kimono, seen in the corridor at the hour of the murder, is not a hallucination. It is a clue or perhaps a deception. Bouc leaned forward, his voice low. "You think someone planted this image in Mrs. Hubbard's mind, or that she is lying?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Both are possible. Mrs. Hubbard is a woman of many words, but not all of them are true. Yet the kimono itself, it is too specific to be invented. I wish to know who owns it, and why it was seen at such a critical moment." Constantine sipped his brandy, his expression skeptical. "But who would wear such a thing? The passengers are a mix of types, yes, but a scarlet kimono? It sounds like something from a novel, not a train." "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. "It is theatrical, and that is what makes it suspicious. A murderer who wishes to confuse leaves clues that are too vivid to memorable. I begin to wonder if the kimono is a distraction meant to draw our eyes from. The truth! The three men fell silent, the only sound the faint creaking of the train as it settled in the snow. Poirot's mind churned, sifting through the interviews he had conducted earlier. The passengers were a tapestry of contradictions. Mary de Benham, the English governess with her cool composure and guarded eyes, Princess Dragomirov, the Russian aristocrat whose imperious demeanor hid a surprising frailty, Hector McQueen, Ratchet's nervous secretary whose loyalty seemed tinged with fear, and Pierre Michel, the conductor whose deference masked a quiet unease. Each had an alibi, but none were airtight. And then there was the burned note, the pipe cleaner, the handkerchief with the initial H, and the smashed watch stopped at 1:15, a collection of clues that pointed everywhere and nowhere. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Let us consider the kimono logically, he said. If it exists, it belongs to someone on this train. If it does not exist, it was described to mislead. But why scarlet? Why a kimono? It is not a common garment, not among these passengers. It suggests an exoticism, a deliberate choice to stand out. Could it belong to one of the women? Book suggested. Mrs. Hubbard herself, perhaps, or the Swedish lady, Miss Olsen. Poirot shook his head. Mrs. Hubbard is not the type for such flamboyance. She favors practical shawls and sturdy shoes. Miss Olsen is too austere, her wardrobe all greys and browns. Princess Dragomirov, perhaps, but her taste runs to furs and velvets, not silk kimonos. And Mary de Benham, she is too controlled, too English for such a garment. What about the Countess Andrényi? Constantine asked. She's young, elegant, Hungarian. A kimono might suit her. Poirot's eyes flickered with interest. The Countess, yes, it is possible. She's poised, theatrical in her own way, with a wardrobe that speaks of wealth and taste. But she claims to have slept through the night, undisturbed. Her husband, the Count, corroborates this. Still, I will speak with her again. The conversation paused as Pierre Michel appeared, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. Messieurs, is there anything you require? He asked, his voice polite but strained. Poirot studied him closely. Michel was a man of middle age, his face lined with the quiet weariness of a career spent serving others. Yet there was something in his eyes, a flicker of nervousness that Poirot had noted earlier. Monsieur Michel, Poirot said, his tone genial, you were on duty last night. Oui. Did you, by chance, see a woman in a scarlet kimono? Michel's hand twitched, almost imperceptibly, before he clasped it behind his back. A scarlet kimono, monsieur? No, I saw no such thing. The corridor was quiet after midnight, except for the cry from Monsieur Ratchet's compartment, and the voices you heard. Poirot pressed. You said they were faint, but did you recognize the language? French, perhaps? Michel hesitated, his eyes darting to book before returning to Poirot. I could not say. Monsieur, it was too muffled. I thought it was Monsieur Ratchet speaking, but I cannot be sure. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Merci. Monsieur Michel, you may go. As the conductor retreated, Book leaned forward, his voice a whisper. You suspect him, Poirot, a conductor involved in murder? I suspect everyone, Poirot replied, his tone light but his eyes hard. Michel is loyal to the company, but loyalty can be bought or coerced. His testimony is too vague, too convenient. And the kimono. It is a puzzle within a puzzle. The night wore on, and Poirot returned to his compartment, his mind racing. He opened his notebook and added a new entry, scarlet kimono real or fabricated. Purpose, distraction or signature. He underlined the word signature, his pen lingering on the page. The kimono felt personal, a flourish that hinted at a deeper motive. Was it a taunt, a message from the murderer, or was it, as he had suggested, to Book, a deliberate misdirection? The next morning, Poirot resumed his interviews, focusing on the women of the train. He began with Countess Andrényi, whose elegance and poise made her a natural candidate for the kimono's owner. She received him in her compartment, her dark hair swept up in a chignon. her silk dress whispering as she moved. Her husband, Count Andrigny, stood protectively nearby, his aristocratic features set in a frown. "Madam," Poirot began, his voice smooth, "you are a woman of refined taste. Tell me, do you own a scarlet kimono, perhaps one with gold or silver embroidery?" The Countess's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she composed herself. "A kimono? No, Monsieur Poirot, I do not. My wardrobe is extensive, but I favor European styles. A kimono would be most unusual." Poirot nodded, his gaze steady. "And last night, after midnight, you were asleep. You heard nothing, saw nothing, nothing," she said firmly, though her fingers tightened on the armrest of her seat. "I took a sleeping draught, as I often do on trains. My husband can confirm this." The Count stepped forward, his voice clipped. "My wife was asleep, Monsieur Poirot. I was awake, reading, and I saw no one in the corridor. Certainly no woman in a kimono." Poirot thanked them and moved on, his suspicions deepening. The Countess's reaction had been subtle, but telling a moment of unease, quickly masked. He interviewed Miss Olsen next, the Swedish missionary, whose plain attire and earnest demeanor made the idea of a scarlet kimono absurd. She blushed at the question, stammering that she owned no such garment and had spent the night in prayer. Mary de Benham was last, and Poirot found her in the dining car, staring out at the snow with an expression of quiet intensity. She was young, perhaps 30, with a face that was striking rather than beautiful, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. When Poirot mentioned the kimono, she met his gaze without flinching. "A scarlet kimono?" she said, her voice cool. "No, Monsieur Poirot, I've never seen such a thing. I was in my compartment all night, as I told you, and you heard nothing unusual?" Poirot asked, watching her closely. "Nothing," she said, but her fingers tightened around her coffee cup, a small betrayal of her composure. Poirot left the dining car, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The kimono was a phantom, a clue that existed only in Mrs. Hubbard's account. Yet it felt too deliberate to be a fabrication. He returned to Ratchet's compartment, where the body had been covered but not yet removed. The crime scene was a study in chaos and precision, 12 stab wounds, some deep, some shallow. Delivered with varying force, a burned note, its fragments hinting at the Armstrong case. A pipe cleaner, suggesting a masculine presence. And the handkerchief with the initial H, which could belong to half a dozen passengers Hubbard. Hildegard Schmidt, Hector McQueen Dot as he stood in the compartment. Poirot's eyes fell on the small window, now frosted with snow. It was too small for a man to climb through, but a woman perhaps. He dismissed the thought the snow outside was undisturbed, and the window was locked from the inside. Yet the kimono lingered in his mind, a scarlet thread weaving through the clues. Over the next hours, Poirot conducted a discreet search of the passengers' luggage with Book's reluctant permission. He found no kimono, scarlet or otherwise, but he did find a small bottle of red ink in Mrs. Hubbard's bag, tucked among her toiletries. The discovery was intriguing, though not conclusive. Ink could be used for many purposes, but it raised the possibility of a staged clue. Had Mrs. Hubbard spilled ink on a plain garment to create the illusion of a kimono? Or was she, too, a pawn in a larger game? By evening, Poirot gathered Book and Constantine in the dining car once more. The passengers were restless, their conversations hushed, their glances wary. Poirot spread his notebook on the table, his notes now a dense web of names, times, and observations. The kimono, he said, is a key, but to what lock? It is too vivid, too specific. To be an accident. I believe it was seen or meant. To be seen to obscure the truth. But the truth, Miss Amos, is beginning to take shape. What truth? Book asked, his voice tense. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The truth that this murder is not the work of one hand, but of many. The kimono is a distraction, a flourish to make us look for a single killer, a woman, perhaps, with a personal vendetta. But the wounds, the alibis, the connections to the Armstrong case, they point to a conspiracy. The passengers, or some of them, are bound by a common purpose. Constantine frowned. A conspiracy? All of them? Not all. Perhaps Poirot said, "But many. The kimono is a lie, or half a lie, meant to lead us astray. Tomorrow, I will confront the passengers, and we shall see who flinches." The night deepened, and Poirot returned to his compartment, his mind alight with possibilities. The scarlet kimono was a puzzle, but it was not the heart of the mystery. The heart lay in the passengers, their secrets, and the shadow of Daisy. Armstrong, whose death had set this deadly retribution in motion, as he closed his notebook. Poirot murmured to himself, "The little grey cells, they do not rest. The truth is near, and I shall find it." The snow continued to fall, sealing the Orient Express in its icy prison. But Poirot's resolve was unshaken. The woman in the scarlet kimono, real or imagined, would lead him to the truth, or she would be swept aside by it. Chapter 9. The puzzle of the locked door. Hercule Poirot sat in the dining car of the Orient Express, his small, precise hands folded neatly on the table before him. The clink of cutlery and the murmur of subdued voices filled the air, but Poirot's mind was far from the elegance of the setting. His grey eyes, sharp and unyielding, darted between the faces of the passengers as they sat at their tables, their expressions a mix of unease and guarded curiosity. The snow outside had trapped the train in its icy grip, and the murder of Samuel Ratchet, or rather, Cassetti, as Poirot now knew him to be, had cast a pall over the journey. The locked door of Ratchet's compartment, a seemingly impenetrable barrier, was the crux of the mystery, and Poirot's thoughts churned relentlessly around it. The dining car, with its polished wood paneling and gleaming silverware, felt like a stage where every passenger played a carefully rehearsed role. Monsieur Buck, the director of the wagon-lit company, sat across from Poirot, his round face creased with worry. Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had examined Ratchet's body, leaned forward, his dark eyes fixed on Poirot with a mixture of admiration and impatience. "Monsieur Poirot," Buck began, his voice low to avoid drawing attention from the nearby passengers. "This business of the locked door, it is impossible, no? The compartment was locked from the inside, the window closed, the chain in place. How could anyone have entered or left without leaving a trace?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained serious. "Impossible, Monsieur Buck? Non. In my experience, what appears impossible is often merely a matter of perspective. The door is locked, yes, but a locked door is not an impenetrable fortress. It is a puzzle, and puzzles have solutions." Dr. Constantine frowned, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "But the facts, Monsieur Poirot. The door was bolted from within. The communicating door to Mrs. Hubbard's compartment was also locked, and she swears no one passed through. The window was shut tight, and the snow outside showed no signs of disturbance. If the murderer did not leave through the door or the window, where did they go?" Poirot leaned back in his chair, his head tilted slightly as if listening to an unseen melody. "That, my friend, is the question. Let us consider the facts, as you say, and then we shall see what possibilities emerge. First, we must examine the mechanics of the crime. The door was locked, yes, but locks can be manipulated. The chain was in place, but chains can be slipped. And the window, though closed, may not tell the whole story." Buck's eyes widened. "You suspect someone tampered with the lock, but who? The conductor, Pierre Michel, was in the corridor most of the night. He would have seen anyone attempting such a thing. Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice soft but deliberate, "or perhaps the conductor's presence is part of the puzzle. Let us reconstruct the night, step by step, and see where the pieces lead us." The train had come to a halt shortly after midnight, stranded in a snowdrift somewhere in the wilds of Yugoslavia. The passengers, roused by the sudden stop, had been restless, their voices carrying through the thin walls of the compartments. Poirot, in his own compartment, had been unable to sleep, disturbed by the faint but unmistakable cry that had echoed through the carriage. It had come from Ratchet's compartment, he was certain, followed by muffled voices, one in French, another indistinct, then silence, broken only by the creak of the train and the howling wind outside dock. By morning, Ratchet was dead, his body discovered in his locked compartment, stabbed 12 times with a precision that suggested both rage And calculation. The door had been locked from the inside, the bolt firmly in place. The communicating door to Mrs. Hubbard's compartment was also locked, and the window, though unlatched, showed no signs of being used as an exit. The snow outside was pristine, untouched by footprints. It was, as Book had said, impossible yet. It had happened. Poirot's mind turned to the clues found at the scene. The burned note, partially legible, had revealed Ratchet's true identity as Cassetti, the man responsible for the kidnapping and murder of Daisy Armstrong, a crime that had shattered a family and left a trail of grief in its wake. The handkerchief, with the initial H, suggested a connection to one of the passengers, perhaps Mrs. Hubbard, though Poirot's instincts told him the clue was too obvious, too conveniently placed. The pipe cleaner, the smashed watch stopped at 1:15. The absence of fingerprints all pointed to a carefully orchestrated crime, but the locked door remained the central enigma. "Let us consider the possibilities," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the hum of the dining car. First, the murderer entered and left through the door, despite its locked state. This could be achieved with a key, a duplicate, or some trick of the lock itself. Second, the murderer used the communicating door to Mrs. Hubbard's compartment, though she denies any such intrusion. Third, the murderer entered through the window, despite the snow showing no signs of disturbance. Or fourth, Poirot paused, his eyes gleaming. The murderer never left the compartment at all. Book blinked, his mouth opening slightly. Never left? But that is absurd. We searched the compartment. There was no one there but Ratchet's body. Absurd, perhaps. Poirot said, but not impossible. A clever murderer might conceal themselves behind a curtain, beneath the bed, even in plain sight, disguised as something else. Or perhaps the murderer is one of the passengers still among us, hiding behind an alibi. Dr. Constantine shook his head. But the passengers, we have their statements. Most were in their compartments, asleep or reading. The conductor, Pierre Michel, saw nothing unusual in the corridor. And Mrs. Hubbard insists she heard someone moving in her compartment, yet found no one. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the table, a rhythmic motion that betrayed the intensity of his thoughts. Mrs. Hubbard's story is curious, is it not? She claims to have heard a man in her compartment, yet the communicating door was locked. She speaks of a presence, yet no one was found. And then there is the scarlet kimono, seen by more than one witness in the corridor, yet claimed by no one. These are not random details, my friends. They are pieces of a pattern, and we must find how they fit. Boop leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. You think these clues were planted? To mislead us? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. It is possible. A murderer who takes the time to burn a note, to smash a watch, to leave a handkerchief, they are not careless. They wish to tell us something, or perhaps to hide something. The locked door, the kimono, the pipe cleaner, all may be part of a performance, a stage set to confuse. The dining car grew quieter as passengers began to leave, their conversations fading into the clatter of dishes being cleared. Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on the faces he had come to know over the past hours. Mrs. Hubbard, with her nervous chatter and insistence on danger. Princess Dragomirov, her aristocratic demeanor masking a steely resolve. Mary de Benham, whose composure hid a flicker of unease, and the others, each with their secrets, their alibis, their possible motives. The Armstrong case loomed large in Poirot's mind, a tragedy that seemed to connect them all. However indirectly, let us return to the door, Poirot said, his voice firm. The lock is a standard wagon-lid design, yes, it requires a key, which the conductor possesses and which Ratchet would have used to secure his compartment. But keys can be duplicated or picked or even bypassed. The bolt, too, can be manipulated with the right tools. A thin piece of metal, perhaps, slipped through the crack of the door. Dr. Constantine nodded slowly. Possible, but it would require skill and time. The conductor was in the corridor, as you said. Would he not have noticed someone tampering with the door? Perhaps he did, Poirot said softly. Or perhaps he was distracted. Pierre Michel's testimony is that he was at his post, but he admits to stepping away briefly to answer a bell, to check on a passenger. A few moments is all a skilled intruder would need. Book's face darkened. You suspect the conductor, but he has been with the company for years. A loyal man, trustworthy. Loyalty does not preclude involvement, Poirot said, but I do not accuse him, not yet. I merely observe that the corridor was not as secure as we might assume. And then there is the matter of the communicating door. Mrs. Hubbard claims it was locked, yet she heard movement. Could someone have passed through, locked it behind them, and left her none the wiser? Dr. Constantine rubbed his chin. It would explain her story, but it would also mean the murderer was in her compartment, however briefly, and she found nothing amiss, no trace of an intruder. Precisely, Poirot said. Which brings us back to the possibility of a conspiracy, if more than one person is involved. The mechanics of the crime become simpler. One could distract, another could act, a third could cover their tracks. The locked door, the planted crucible could be the work of a group, united by a common purpose. Book's eyes widened. A group? You mean to say several passengers worked together to kill Ratchet? It is a theory, Poirot said, his tone measured. The Armstrong case gives us a motive. Cassetti's crime destroyed lives, parents, siblings, friends, servants. Many on this train have connections to that tragedy. If they acted together, the locked door becomes less of an obstacle. One could enter, another could lock it. A third could create an alibi. The idea hung in the air, heavy with implication. Dr. Constantine shook his head, as if trying to shake off the weight of it. It is too fantastic, Monsieur Poirot. 12 stab wounds, 12 passengers. It sounds like a story, not a crime. Yet, stories often hold truth, Poirot said. Let us test the theory. If the murderer or murderers entered through the door, they needed access to a key or a tool. If they used the communicating door, they needed to pass through Mrs. Hubbard's compartment undetected. If they came through the window, they needed to leave no trace in the snow. And if they never left, they are still among us, hiding in plain sight. He paused, his eyes narrowing. Let us examine the window more closely. It was closed, yes, but not locked. Could it have been opened and closed again? The snow smoothed over to hide footprints, or perhaps the window is a distraction, meant to draw our attention from the door. Book groaned. You make my head spin, Poirot. Every possibility leads to another question. That is the nature of a puzzle, Poirot said, his voice calm but resolute. We must follow each thread, no matter how tangled, until we find the truth. For now, let us focus on the passengers, their alibis, their connections, their secrets. They will tell us how the door was breached. The dining car was nearly empty now, the last of the passengers retreating to their compartments. Poirot rose, his movements precise and deliberate. I will speak to Pierre Michel again, he said, and to Mrs. Hubbard. Their stories are key to the door, I think. And then, perhaps, the scarlet kimono will reveal its owner. As he left the dining car, the snow outside continued to fall, blanketing the train in silence. The locked door of Ratchet's compartment loomed in Poirot's mind, a challenge to his intellect, a barrier to the truth. But barriers, he knew, could be overcome. With patience, with logic, with the relentless pursuit of the little grey cells. He would find the answer. The hours that followed were a blur of interviews, observations, and deductions. Poirot began with Pierre Michel, the conductor, whose nervous demeanor suggested more than simple concern for the murder. Michel stood in the corridor, his uniform immaculate, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Monsieur Michel, Poirot began, his tone gentle but probing. You were in the corridor last night. Yes, from midnight until the train stopped. And after? Michel nodded, his eyes flickering to the side. Oui, monsieur. I was at my post, as always. I heard nothing unusual except for the cry Monsieur Poirot mentioned. And then, of course, the bell's passengers ringing for service. Which passengers? Poirot asked, his gaze steadied. Michel hesitated. Mrs. Hubbard rang several times, complaining of noises. Colonel Arbuthnot called for a glass of water, and Monsieur Ratchet he rang just before midnight, asking for a sleeping draught. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. A sleeping draught. Did you provide it? Oui, monsieur. I brought it from the dining car. He took it and seemed satisfied. And after that, you saw no one in the corridor, no one near Ratchet's compartment. Michel shook his head. No one, monsieur. Except, well, I saw a woman in a red kimono just for a moment passing toward the dining car, but it was late, and I could not see her face. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The scarlet kimono again. Curious, is it not, that no one claims it? Tell me, Monsieur Michel, the door to Ratchet's compartment, was it locked when you checked it after the cry? Oui, monsieur. Locked and bolted. I knocked, but there was no answer. I assumed he was asleep. And the communicating door to Mrs. Hubbard's compartment, also locked, Michel said quickly. I checked it myself at her request. She was most insistent that someone had been in her compartment. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Michel's story was consistent, yet there were gaps, moments when he had been distracted, when the corridor was unwatched. A skilled murderer could have slipped past, perhaps with an accomplice to create a diversion. The sleeping draught, too, was a detail to consider. Had Ratchet been drugged to ensure he did not resist? The autopsy had shown no signs of a sedative, but Dr. Constantine's examination had been cursory. Limited by the conditions on the train. Next, Poirot sought out Mrs. Hubbard, whose compartment adjoined Ratchet's. She was in her berth, her face pale and her hands clutching a lace handkerchief. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed as he entered, "I haven't slept a wink since it happened. To think a murderer was so close, perhaps in my very compartment." "Calm yourself, madam," Poirot said, his voice soothing. "Tell me again of last night. You heard movement, yes? And you felt a presence?" Mrs. Hubbard nodded vigorously. Yes. I woke to a noise like someone moving about. I called for the conductor, but by the time he came, there was nothing. The communicating door was locked, but I swear someone had been there. I could feel it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this noise, it came from the direction of Monsieur Ratchet's compartment?" "I think so," she said, her voice trembling. "It's all so dreadful. And then there was that kimono. I saw it, too, in the corridor, just a flash of red. I thought it was a dream at first, but now I'm not so sure." Poirot listened carefully, noting the fear in her voice, the way her hands twisted the handkerchief. Was she genuinely frightened, or was her story a performance, designed to obscure her own involvement? The communicating door was a critical piece of the puzzle. If someone had passed through, they would have needed to lock it behind them, leaving no trace. But Mrs. Hubbard's insistence on an intruder felt rehearsed, as if she were playing a part. As Poirot left her compartment, his thoughts returned to the locked door. The mechanics of the crime were becoming clearer, but the motive remained elusive. The Armstrong case tied the passengers together, but how had they coordinated such an act? And why the elaborate clues, the kimono, the handkerchief, the pipe cleaner? Were they meant to mislead or to point to a deeper truth? Back in the dining car, Poirot gathered his notes, spreading them across the table. The passenger list was a mosaic of names and connections. Princess Dragomirov, whose friend had been Daisy Armstrong's godmother, Mary de Benham, whose guarded. Demeanor suggested a hidden past. Hector McQueen, Ratchet's secretary. Who knew of his employer's dark history? And the others, each with a thread leading back to the Armstrong tragedy. The 12 stab wounds were no coincidence. Poirot was certain they were a message, a symbol of retribution. He closed his eyes, letting his mind sift through the details. The locked door was not a barrier, but a clue, a challenge to his intellect. Someone had entered and left, or perhaps they had never left at all. The solution was there, hidden in the alibis, the clues, the passengers' secrets. He needed only to find the right thread and pull. The snow continued to fall outside, sealing the train in its icy prison. Poirot opened his eyes, his resolve unshaken. The puzzle of the locked door would be solved, and with it, the truth of Ratchet's murder. He rose, his small frame radiating determination, and set out to confront the passengers once more. The answers were on this train, and he would find them one by one. The rest of the chapter unfolded as Poirot delved deeper into the mystery, his interviews growing more pointed, his observations more acute. He spoke to Mary de Benham, whose calm exterior cracked under his probing questions, revealing a connection to the Armstrong family through her former employer. He questioned Princess Drogomirov, whose steely gaze met his with equal intensity, her cryptic remarks hinting at a deeper knowledge of the crime. He examined the conductor's log, noting the times of the bells and the gaps in Michelle's presence. Each conversation added a piece to the puzzle, but the locked door remained the key. By evening, Poirot had formed a clearer picture. The murderer. Murderers had entered through the door, likely using a duplicate key or a tool to slip the bolt. The communicating door was a possibility, but Mrs. Hubbard's story suggested it was a distraction, meant to confuse. The window, though tempting, was unlikely. The snow was to pristine, the cold to severe. The scarlet kimono, the handkerchief, the pipe cleaner all were part of a deliberate misdirection, designed to obscure the truth. As night fell, Poirot sat alone in his compartment, the train silent around him. The locked door was no longer a mystery, but a solution waiting to be articulated. The passengers, united by their shared grief, had acted together, each playing a role in the murder of Cossetti. The door had been locked to protect them, to create the illusion of an impossible crime. But Poirot saw through the illusion, his little grey cells piecing together the truth. He would confront them soon, gather them in the dining car and lay bare their conspiracy. But for now, he let the puzzle rest, his mind clear and focused. The locked door had been opened not by force but by logic, and with it, the truth was within his grasp.